Daniel Hayes snatched the phone right out of her hand. Not roughly, but deliberately. The way a man grabs something before he fully understands what he's holding. And then he went completely still. Claire Bennett had saved his name with a warning. A private, humiliating, devastatingly honest warning she never meant for him to see. 3 words that changed everything between them. But here's what nobody tells you about the moment. 2 people stop pretending it doesn't feel like relief. It feels like standing at the edge of something you can't come back from. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe. This one's going to stay with you. The phone was still warm from her hand when Daniel unlocked it. That detail would stay with him later. The way it held her heat. The way something so small could carry so much. It was 2:47 on a Friday afternoon in mid-January, and Columbus, Ohio, had decided to remind everyone that winter wasn't finished with them yet. The sky outside the windshield was the color of old concrete, the kind of gray that settles into your bones and makes you feel like the sun is a rumor someone made up. Claire's car smelled like the vanilla air freshener she'd clipped to the vent last fall and the faint ghost of the coffee she'd finished 40 minutes ago. Daniel had noticed both things within the first 10 seconds of getting in. He noticed things about Claire the way some men notice things about their own kitchen automatically, without deciding to the way familiarity rewires your attention. Left on broad, Claire said. I think. Unless the construction ate that too. Your GPS is frozen. I know it's frozen, Daniel. That's why I handed you my phone. You handed me your phone to fix the GPS. Correct. Not to browse your contacts. Also correct. So stop browsing my contacts. He hadn't been. Not intentionally. He'd been trying to pull up the Maps application, and the screen had slipped sideways, and the Contacts app had opened, and the search bar had somehow populated with the letter D, and then, there it was. His own face looked back at him from the thumbnail. The photo was from last year's company holiday party. He was mid-laugh, tie slightly loosened, looking at something off-camera that had genuinely amused him. He remembered that moment. Claire had said something about the decorating committee's decision to hang mistletoe directly above the copier, and he'd laughed so hard he'd almost spilled his drink. He hadn't known she'd taken a picture. He hadn't known she'd kept it. And beneath that laughing, unsuspecting version of himself in Claire's neat, organized contacts list. Daniel, don't text him drunk. He read it twice, then a third time in case his brain was malfunctioning. You found the route, Claire asked. She was navigating by memory now, hands easy on the wheel, the way she did everything competent, unhurried, making difficult things look like no effort at all. Not exactly, Daniel said. Something in his voice made her glance over. One look at his expression, and her face changed completely. The color that flooded into Claire Bennett's cheeks in the next 2 seconds was the kind of red that honest people turn when they have absolutely no prepared lie available. Give me the phone, she said. Claire. Daniel. Her voice was steady. Her hand was not. She reached across the center console, and he pulled the phone back, not unkindly, just far enough that she couldn't reach it without unbuckling her seatbelt. Don't text him drunk, Daniel said. It's a reminder system. For what? Your impulse control. For a lot of people. Vanessa is in there as, Vanessa, stop lending her your debit card. My dentist is Dr. Holt, you actually like him, don't cancel. It's a whole organizational method. That's fascinating. He kept his voice very neutral. Walk me through why I specifically needed a drunk texting warning. Because I'm safety conscious. Claire. Daniel. Why? She stared straight ahead with the focus of a woman trying to navigate by sheer force of personal dignity. Eyes on the road. You're driving. I'm asking questions. I can't answer questions and drive in the snow. There's barely any snow. It's January in Columbus. There's always threat of snow. It's a psychological condition in this city. She signaled, changed lanes, and then pressed her lips together in the particular way she did when she was running through options and discarding them one by one. Daniel waited. He was good at waiting. 4 years of single fatherhood had taught him that silence applied with patience was more effective than almost any question. Then his eyes dropped back to the screen, and he saw the notification at the top. He hadn't meant to look, but it was there previewed in a banner across the top of the contact page, time-stamped 11 minutes ago from a contact labeled, "Vanessa emergency only, she is not. Please tell me you didn't confess to Daniel again last night." Again. The word sat in the middle of that sentence like a lit fuse. Again. Daniel looked at Claire. Claire was staring through the windshield with the concentrated attention of someone trying to astral project out of their own vehicle. "Claire," he said, very quietly. "It's Vanessa. She exaggerates." She said again. "She uses words imprecisely. It's one of her defining characteristics." "How many times," Daniel said, "have you almost texted me something you decided not to send?" Silence. Real silence this time. Not the comfortable quiet they'd built over 2 years of working side by side and driving together to vendor meetings and eating lunch in the same break room 3 or 4 times a week. This was a different kind. The kind that has weight. "That's not relevant information," Claire said. "I think it's fairly relevant." "To what?" "To the conversation we appear to be having, whether either of us planned for it." She exhaled through her nose. "Daniel. The name. The notification. Vanessa saying again, I'm not making this up." "Nobody said you were making it up." "Then what are we doing right now?" "We're driving," she said, "to a charity gala that is currently experiencing what our client described as a complete logistical catastrophe, because Elena called in sick at 3 o'clock on the day of the event, and if we don't get there in the next 30 minutes and fix approximately 12 things simultaneously, the Riverside Children's Foundation is going to lose $50,000 in pledged donations, and we are both going to be unemployed on a Friday in January. So." She glanced at him. "Navigation, please." Daniel looked down at the phone. He opened the Maps app. He found the alternate route. He gave her the directions, and they didn't talk about the name in her contacts for the next 18 minutes. But Daniel didn't put the phone down either. He held it in his lap and stared at the window and watched the Columbus skyline slide past and thought about a lot of things he hadn't let himself think about in a very long time. Here was the thing about Daniel Hayes that most people understood within 5 minutes of meeting him. He was reliable. Not in the boring way. Not in the way that meant he was predictable or dull or lacking ambition. Reliable. The way a good foundation is reliable, the kind you don't think about because it never gives you a reason to. He showed up when he said he would. He did what he committed to. He remembered the things people told him mattered to them and acted accordingly without fanfare or expectation of credit. He was 36 years old and he had been a widower for 4 years. Sophie's mother. Melissa had died from a brain aneurysm 17 months after Sophie was born. She was fine on a Tuesday, and she was gone on a Wednesday, and Daniel had been in a conference room in downtown Columbus reviewing a maintenance contract when his phone rang, and his entire life rearranged itself into a before and an after. I didn't talk about it much. Not because the grief had faded, it had changed, which is a different thing, but because the story of what he'd lost had become less useful to him than the story of what he was building. Sophie was 9 now. She was smart and funny, and had her mother's way of tilting her head when she thought something was unfair. She collected sticker books and had very strong opinions about pancake toppings, and still sometimes climbed into Daniel's bed at 3 in the morning, without explanation, just to be near him. How was a good father? He knew this. He also knew that being a good father had become somewhere along the way the thing he hid behind when the rest of life got complicated. Romance was complicated. Wanting things for himself, things that weren't directly related to Sophie's welfare, or the household budget, or the structural integrity of his career, felt like a luxury he hadn't budgeted for. And so he had quietly, and without quite deciding, to stop expecting it. Until Claire. Claire was not something he'd decided on. She had happened to him the way weather happens, gradually, and then all at once, and by the time he fully understood what was occurring, he was already in it. She'd started at the company 23 months ago, transferred from their Cincinnati office, introduced herself by accidentally walking into what she thought was the break room, and was in fact a quarterly budget presentation. She'd stood in the doorway for exactly 2 seconds before saying, "I'm Claire Bennett. I'm the new events coordinator, and I am so sorry, But does anyone know where the actual coffee is? And then backing out with a grace that shouldn't have been possible given the circumstances. The entire room had laughed. Daniel had been the only one who also watched the door close behind her and felt something shift. He'd managed for a while to keep the feeling at a distance. They worked in adjacent departments. Their jobs overlapped in ways that made regular collaboration unavoidable. He was good at maintaining professional warmth without crossing into territory he couldn't explain. He told himself the coffee she left on his desk was just a thoughtful coworker gesture. He told himself fixing the leak under her kitchen sink when she mentioned it was just being neighborly. He told himself that the fact he could identify her laugh from 2 hallways away was simply a matter of acoustics. How as it turned out a very convincing liar when the subject was himself. The moment he stopped being convincing. The moment he knew he had a real problem was a Thursday morning 14 months ago. Sophie's babysitter had called at 7 a.m. with a stomach flu. Daniel had a 9 o'clock presentation to the regional VP that he'd been preparing for 3 weeks. He could not cancel. He could not in 14 months find a backup babysitter at 7 in the morning who was available within 2 hours. So he brought Sophie to work. He hadn't broadcast it. He'd cleared it quietly with his direct supervisor set Sophie up at the small table in the corner of his office with her homework and her headphones, answered her questions in between email responses, and braided her hair badly because he was still learning in the break room sink at 8:45 while simultaneously reviewing his presentation notes in his head. He'd been mid-braid Sophie sitting backward on a break room chair and complaining that he was pulling when Claire walked in. She'd taken in the situation in about half a second. "Trade you," she said. She set her coffee cup on the counter. "I'll finish the braid. You review your notes." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She was already behind Sophie, gently but efficiently dismantling his work. "Hi, I'm Claire. I work with your dad. I have been doing my own hair since I was 7, and I promise this will hurt significantly less." Sophie had looked at her with the direct evaluating gaze she got from her father. "Do you know how to do a French braid?" "I know 7 kinds of braid." "Dad only knows 1. In his defense, it's a hard one. Sophie had laughed. And just like that, as if it were completely ordinary, she'd let Claire finish her hair while Daniel sat at the break room table and read through his notes and tried very hard not to watch the 2 of them in the way he wanted to. He'd given the presentation. He'd come back to find Sophie and Claire in his office, Sophie doing homework while Claire worked on her laptop beside her, the 2 of them having established some kind of quiet, companionable understanding that Daniel hadn't asked for and couldn't quite process. When he'd tried to thank Claire later, she'd waved it off with the ease of someone for whom generosity was simply a resting state. "She's a great kid, Daniel." "Yeah." He'd paused. "She is. And the braid was actually pretty good, for someone who only knows 1. He'd laughed. And she'd walked back to her office. And he'd stood in the hallway for a moment longer than necessary, understanding with the clarity of someone who'd been carefully not understanding something for quite a while, that he was in trouble. They arrived at the Riverside Grand Ballroom at 3:31 p.m. The event director met them at the service entrance with the expression of a man who had been waiting for someone to save him and was not entirely sure they were capable. "The floral centerpieces," he said by way of greeting, "are not here." "Define not here," Claire said. "The vendor called 40 minutes ago. Their refrigeration unit failed overnight. The arrangements are unsalvageable." "Okay." Claire was already pulling out her phone with her free hand, her own phone which she'd taken back from Daniel in the parking lot, with the precision of someone reclaiming evidence and pulling up a contact. "I have a backup florist I've used for emergencies. She's more expensive and she'll know it, so I'll handle the negotiation. What else? The seating chart has a critical error. Table assignments for the donor committee put 2 board members who are actively in litigation at adjacent seats. Table numbers 14 and 15. Separate them. Move the Harrington party to 12, the Morrison group to 16, and put the empty table. There's always an empty table between 14 and 15 as a buffer." The event director blinked. "How did you know there'd be an empty table?" "There's always an empty table." She was already moving into the ballroom phone to her ear. "Daniel, keynote speaker." His car service canceled, Daniel said, falling into step beside her, the way they always did at events synchronized, efficient, like a two-person unit that had been running drills. He's at his hotel on the north side. I'll call him directly and arrange a car. Use Marcus at Columbus Elite. Tell him it's us and it's urgent, and we'll handle the invoice Monday. On it. The catering staging area. I'll check it while you're on the phone. The AV setup. Already texted Jim. He's en route. She paused in the middle of the ballroom and turned to look at him. You texted Jim before I mentioned AV. I texted Jim when the event director called you at 3 o'clock and your voice did the thing it does. What thing? The thing where it goes very calm right before you start solving everything. Claire stared at him for a second longer than the moment required. The backup florist is ringing, she said and turned away. Daniel watched her go. Watched her navigate between half-set tables with the focused energy of someone who was completely in her element, and thought about the warning in her phone and the word again in Vanessa's message, and understood with the kind of clarity that arrives too late to be comfortable that noticing the way Claire's voice changed under pressure was not something a man did about a coworker. He'd been doing it for over a year. He called Marcus at Columbus Elite. Chad. For the next 4 hours, the Riverside Grand Ballroom was a controlled emergency. The backup florist arrived at 4:15 and charged them 30% over market, which Claire accepted without flinching, and negotiated down to 22% by the time the invoice was signed. The seating chart was restructured twice, once because of the litigation issue, and again when someone discovered that the charity's honorary chairwoman had mobility limitations that required different table placement near the accessible entrance. Daniel handled both revisions, personally moving cards, with the precise attention of a man who understood that small logistical failures in a room full of wealthy donors had consequences that lasted long after the evening ended. The keynote speaker, Dr. Elaine Vasquez, arrived at 5:45 in a Columbus Elite town car and immediately found Claire to thank her. Claire accepted the gratitude with the easy professional warmth that was one of her most underestimated qualities, the ability to make people feel seen without making herself the center of the transaction. Daniel noticed. He noticed it the way he noticed most things about Claire, with the particular attention of a man trying very hard to convince himself he was paying normal levels of attention. The first guests arrived at 6:30. By 7, the ballroom was nearly full. The centerpieces were extraordinary. The sound system was working, and the bar was running 6 minutes ahead of schedule. Claire found him by the service corridor at 6:55, checking the catering timeline. We might actually pull this off, she said. We always pull it off. We have never had a day this bad. We had the Glenwood anniversary event last March. The Glenwood event didn't have a failed florist and a seating chart lawsuit and a missing keynote speaker. No, he agreed. It just had a wedding cake that was accidentally assembled upside down. She laughed. And there it was, the thing he'd been telling himself meant nothing for 23 months. Her laugh, when it was real, started in her eyes about half a second before it reached her voice. He'd mapped the sequence so thoroughly at this point that he could have described it to a stranger. He looked away. You were right, by the way, he said. I'm frequently right. Specify. The florist, the negotiation. You handled it better than I would have. I knew she'd take 22 because she wants the referral business more than she wants the upcharge. It was just math. It wasn't just math. Claire turned to look at him. There was something careful in her expression, the way she sometimes looked at him when he said something that came too close to the territory they didn't discuss. Daniel, she started. His phone buzzed. He looked down. The text was from his sister Karen. Emergency at school pickup situation with Mark. Do you want me to bring Sophie to you, or can she go to aftercare? He was already typing back when Claire said, What happened? Sophie. Karen has something with Mark. I have to figure out. She can come here. Claire said it the way she said most things, quickly, directly, without performing the decision. I'll set her up in the staging area. It's calm back there until 8:30. She can do homework. We've got snacks, and when the dinner service starts, she can watch from the back. Claire, you're already managing everything. Sophie doesn't add to my workload. She's good at staying out of the way when she needs to, and useful when she wants to be. She paused. Text Karen the address. Daniel looked at her. "Text Karen," Claire said again gently. He texted Karen. Sophie arrived at 7:20 in her school clothes backpack on homework folder in hand, with the calm adaptability of a child who had learned early that the adults in her life sometimes had situations, and the best thing you could do was be portable. She hugged her father, said hello to the event director, and then went immediately to Claire. "What do you need me to do?" Sophie asked. Claire looked at her seriously, as if this were a genuine professional consultation. "Can you fold napkins into a specific shape if I show you once?" "Probably." "That's the right answer. Come on." Daniel watched his daughter, Claire, toward the staging area, already asking a question about the napkin fold technique, and felt something in his chest that he had no good name for. He went back to work. The fundraising dinner went well. Dr. Vasquez gave a keynote address that had the donor committee on their feet. The catering ran on schedule. The auction exceeded its target by 11%. The board members in litigation never made eye contact, which meant the seating strategy had worked. At 9:45, Claire found Daniel in the back corridor, reviewing the vendor checklist, and handed him a cup of coffee without comment. He took it without comment. This was a thing they had done for nearly 2 years in both directions. Coffee appeared when the other person needed it. Nobody kept score. "Sophie fell asleep in the staging area," Claire said. "On the couch by the linens. I put my jacket over her." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. She's fine. Leave her until we wrap the back end. She sleeps like a rock." I know you know. I'm just saying she's okay." He looked at her. "Thank you, for today, for all of it." Claire's expression shifted in a way he was learning to read as, "Don't make this into something, Daniel." "That's what we do." Claire. Daniel. "I'm serious." "So am I. We make things work. It's what we're good at." She paused, turning to look at the ballroom through the corridor window. The guests in evening wear, the lights low over the tables, the controlled success of an event that had nearly collapsed 8 hours ago. "We make a pretty good team." "Yeah," he said. "We do." I was looking at her profile when he said it. The set of her jaw. The way she held her coffee cup in both hands when she wasn't actively working, which was rare. The line of her shoulders in the dress she'd worn to the event. Dark green professional. The kind of thing that looked deliberate and unfussy at the same time. He was thinking about the warning in her phone. He was thinking about again. I was thinking about 14 months of noticing, and not saying, and telling himself it was a decision when it was actually a fear wearing the costume of a decision. "Claire," he said. She turned. Something in his voice, the way it differed from the 1100 times he'd said her name in professional contexts, made her go very still. "You're not the only one," he said, "who's been deleting things." The corridor was quiet. From the ballroom, he could hear the low sound of the string quartet someone had hired for the after-dinner hour. He could hear Claire breathing. "Daniel." "I have your contact saved," he said. "Been saved under the same thing for about 6 months. I know what it should say. Your name, your number. That's what it says for everyone else in there." He paused. "That's not what I saved you as." Claire looked at him. Something crossed her face, not quite hope, not yet. Something more complicated than that. The expression of a woman who had wanted something for a long time and had gotten so good at not wanting it that she wasn't sure she knew how to let herself. "What did you save me as?" she said. He would have told her. He was ready to tell her. That was the moment the elevator at the end of the corridor opened. The sound was ordinary, the soft mechanical exhale of elevator doors parting. But Daniel looked up the way you do when something interrupts a conversation at the exact wrong instant, and his expression changed. Claire followed his gaze. The woman who stepped out of the elevator was around 35, polished in the way that came from genuine confidence, rather than effort, wearing a charcoal blazer and moving through the space with the easy authority of someone who belonged everywhere she went. She saw Daniel. She smiled. The smile of someone encountering a specific kind of history, not a bad history, but a complicated one. "Daniel," she said, "I didn't know you'd be here tonight." Daniel said very quietly. Rachel. Claire looked at him. Daniel looked at Rachel. And the words he'd been about to say, the thing he'd saved in his phone, the 6 months he'd spent working up to a moment like this one, stayed exactly where they were, unspoken. The string quartet played something slow in the ballroom behind them. Sophie slept in the staging area under Claire's jacket, and Claire Bennett, who had spent 2 years talking herself out of believing in something she wanted very badly, watched Daniel Hayes look at his ex-girlfriend and went very, very quiet inside, in the way she'd learned to go quiet when the world confirmed what she'd been afraid of all along. Her face gave nothing away. She was good at that. She'd had a lot of practice. Rachel Morgan had the kind of composure that made a room feel smaller. Not because she was trying to dominate it. That was the thing about her that had always been hardest to explain. She walked in, and things simply organized themselves around her, the way furniture rearranges in your mind when someone particularly tall enters. She was looking at Daniel with that calm, recognizing smile, and Daniel was looking back at her with an expression Claire had never seen on his face before. Not love. Not exactly. Something older than that. The specific stillness of a person encountering a chapter of themselves they thought they'd finished. "I didn't know you'd be here," Daniel said again, which told Claire he'd already said it once, and hadn't meant to repeat himself. "The consulting contract," Rachel said simply. "I was going to call Monday. I didn't realize the timing." She glanced toward the ballroom. "This is your event." "Ours," Daniel said. He gestured toward Claire with the slight hesitation of a man who had just been on the verge of saying something enormous to the woman beside him and was now reorienting. "Claire Bennett. She's our events coordinator. She's the one who kept tonight from falling apart." Rachel turned to Claire with a smile that was frustratingly completely genuine. "I've heard good things. Daniel mentioned the charity campaign last quarter." She extended her hand. "Rachel Morgan." "I know who you are," Claire said. She shook the hand. Her voice was professional and warm and revealed nothing. "Welcome back to Columbus." "Thank you." Rachel looked between the two of them with an awareness that Claire recognized as intelligence. "I'm interrupting something." "Not at all," Claire said, which was the most precise lie she had told in years. We were just finishing the walkthrough. I need to go check on the donor committee's departure logistics." She looked at Daniel, and the look lasted exactly as long as a professional look between coworkers should last, and not a single second more. "I'll handle the closeout. You should catch up." She walked away before Daniel could respond. She walked away, and she kept her shoulders straight, and her pace unhurried, and she did not look back, which took more out of her than the previous 6 hours of crisis management combined. In the staging area, Sophie was still asleep on the couch, one hand tucked under her cheek. Daniel's daughter, looking in sleep exactly like the photographs Daniel kept on his desk of Melissa. Claire stood there for a moment watching her breathe, and allowed herself exactly 60 seconds of feeling the thing she'd been trained by experience not to feel. 60 seconds. Then she folded it up and put it where she kept everything else she couldn't afford. She picked up her jacket from Sophie's shoulders very carefully, so as not to wake her. The fabric held the warmth of a sleeping 9-year-old. Claire held it for a moment before putting it on. Then she went back to work. That was what she was good at. The closeout took 40 minutes. Claire handled the donor committee, the catering invoice, the final vendor signatures, and the keynote speaker's car service confirmation with the systematic efficiency that had made her in 23 months the most relied upon person in a company that sometimes forgot to tell her so. She was signing off on the venue checklist at 10:40 when Daniel appeared at her shoulder. "She's gone," he said. "I know. I saw the car service from the lobby window." Claire didn't look up from the checklist. "The venue director needs your signature on the facility's closeout. It's the blue form." "Claire." "Daniel, the blue form." He took the clipboard. He signed the blue form. He handed it back. And then he stood there in the way he sometimes stood when he had something to say and was deciding whether the moment was the right moment, which was a decision he frequently got wrong in both directions. "What I was saying," he started. "In the corridor, before. You don't have to explain Rachel Morgan to me." "I know I don't have to. I want to." "Daniel." She finally looked at him. Her expression was composed and kind, and held a distance that hadn't been there 2 hours ago. "It's late. Sophie's asleep. Let's just get through the rest of this and get your daughter home." He looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she had to work to maintain the composure. "Okay," he said quietly. The drive home was different from the drive there. The traffic was thin, and the radio filled the silence with something neither of them registered. Sophie slept across the back seat, breathing softly, her school backpack wedged between her feet. Daniel sat in the passenger seat with his own phone in his hand this time, looking at it without looking at it. Halfway home he said, "Her name is saved in my phone." Claire kept her eyes on the road. "I assumed." "Not the way you're assuming." She said nothing. "I changed it 6 months ago," he said. "After the Glenwood event. After you stayed 2 hours past closeout to help rebox the centerpieces because the venue staff went home early and you knew I'd feel responsible for the client's rental equipment." He paused. "I changed it that night." Claire's hands adjusted slightly on the wheel. "I changed it," Daniel said, "because I'd been meaning to for about 4 months before that, and I kept not doing it, and that night I decided I was done not doing things." His voice was even, deliberate. The voice he used when something mattered too much for dramatic inflection. "I didn't act on it. I kept not acting on it. But the name changed." Claire said nothing for a long moment. Outside Columbus moved past in the dark, ordinary, and indifferent. "What does it say?" she said. Daniel looked back at his phone. "I'll show you when you're not driving." They didn't speak for the rest of the ride. He carried Sophie inside, while Claire held the door. The child stirred, but didn't wake, which was the particular grace of deeply sleeping 9-year-olds who trusted without condition that the adults moving them knew what they were doing. Daniel laid her on her bed with the careful tenderness he brought to everything that mattered to him. He stood in the doorway of her room for a moment, in the way parents stand when they need a second to just look. When he came back to the front door, Claire was pulling on her coat, ready to go. He held out his phone. She looked at it. At the contact open on the screen. Her own name, her own number, and under it, where a professional contact saves a job title or a company name. "Claire, call her coward." She read it twice. She looked up at him. "6 months," she said. 6 months. "And you never called." "I called plenty. For work." A slight pause. "You know what I mean." Claire looked back at the screen. "This is not the contact name of a man who has no feelings." "No," Daniel agreed. "It's not. And yet. He took the phone back. "I was working up to it. And tonight in the corridor, I was about to—" He stopped. And then Rachel." "Yes." Claire pulled her coat closed. "Daniel, I need you to understand something. And I need you to hear it as something I mean, not something I'm saying because I'm upset. Okay, I have spent approximately 20 months telling myself a story about why a man like you would never look at a woman like me the way I wanted you to look at me." She said it cleanly, without drama, like someone reporting information. "I got very good at that story. I could tell it from any angle with evidence. She's not his type. She's his work friend. She's the funny one, not the one he goes home thinking about." She met his eyes. "And then tonight I almost stopped believing it. For about 40 minutes in a ballroom, I almost stopped. Claire." And then Rachel Morgan stepped out of an elevator, and she looked exactly like the ending of the story I'd already written. She held up one hand. "I'm not angry at you. I'm not angry at her. I'm telling you this because you should know it. Because if you are going to say something to me, I need you to understand what you're saying it to. Not just what you feel right now, what I've been carrying." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Not processing. Just being with what she'd said. "She looked like the end of your story," he said. "Yes. She's not." "How do you know?" Because the story I've been in for the last 20 months, he said, has been about you. Not in spite of Rachel. Not because of anything that ended. You specifically." His voice didn't waver. "You think I don't know why I saved you under that name? It wasn't a joke. It was the thing I knew about myself that I hadn't dealt with yet." Claire's jaw tightened slightly. Not anger. Something closer to the effort of staying controlled when you want not to be. "It's late," she said. "Sophie's home. Don't say things tonight that you haven't thought through." "I've thought through every version of this for 6 months." "Then think through it until Monday." She opened the front door. "And thank you for tonight. It was..." She paused. "It was a good night, despite everything." She walked out. Daniel stood in his open doorway and watched her taillights disappear down the quiet street and didn't move until they were gone. Then he went to check on Sophie, who had kicked off her blanket in the 7 minutes since he'd laid her down. He covered her again. She didn't stir. He sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a while. "Dad," Sophie said without opening her eyes. He tensed. "You're awake." "I was awake when Claire was here." A pause. "Not all the way awake, just enough." "Okay." "She fixed my hair when I fell asleep. It was coming undone. I felt her fix it." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "She's really careful." "Yeah," Daniel said. "She is." "Dad." Why don't you just ask her out?" Daniel sat with that question in the dark for a long time. "Because I'm scared," he finally said. Honest, because Sophie deserved honesty more than she deserved comfortable deflection. Sophie considered this. Of what? Of getting it wrong. "You get stuff wrong all the time," she said with the specific gentleness of a child who has watched her parent be hard on himself and decided to push back. "You got my braid wrong until she showed you. You still burn the toast sometimes. You forgot picture day twice." "Those are different." "Are they?" He looked at his daughter in the dark, 9 years old and already seeing through him with her mother's clarity. "You should sleep," he said. "You should call Claire," she said, and pulled the blanket up and closed her eyes. Daniel sat there another minute. Then he went to the kitchen, stood at the counter, and looked at his phone for a long time before he put it down and went to bed. He didn't call, but it was a closer thing than it had been in months. The weekend passed in the particular quiet that follows a night that has changed something. Daniel took Sophie to her soccer practice. Saturday morning stood on the sideline in the January cold and thought about a corridor and an elevator and the expression on Claire's face when she'd said she'd been carrying something for 20 months. He helped with homework Saturday afternoon. He made chicken soup Saturday night because it was Sophie's preferred dinner when she was tired, and she was tired, and feeding people was one of the ways Daniel showed love when words were complicated. Sunday, he fixed the loose hinge on the back gate. He reorganized the garage. He thought about texting Claire 4 times and didn't. He thought about what she'd said, "Don't say things tonight. You haven't thought through," and wondered whether waiting was discipline or just the same old fear in a more respectable coat. Monday morning arrived. The first thing Daniel saw when he walked into the office was Rachel Morgan in the conference room sitting across from their company's regional director with a consulting brief open in front of her and the particular focused attention that told him this was not a courtesy visit. She was here. She was going to be here at least for the duration of the contract in the hallways and the conference rooms and the daily geography of a workplace that was supposed to be neutral territory. He saw this. He also saw the precise moment Claire saw it. She was walking toward the break room, coffee cup in hand, and she glanced through the conference room glass, and she registered Rachel, the way you register something you'd half expected and hoped not to see. Her stride didn't change. Her expression didn't change. She turned and went to the break room and came back with her coffee and went to her office and closed the door. Daniel's coffee cup appeared on his keyboard at 9:15 as it always did. Except this morning it was left there. No knock. No, "You look like you need this." Just the cup placed quietly while he'd been in the supply room by someone who was leaving before he could come back. He stood at his desk and looked at the cup for a moment. Then he picked it up and walked to Claire's office and knocked. "Come in." She was at her computer already running on the day, a spreadsheet open and 3 browser tabs visible behind it. She looked up with a professional expression that was so deliberately professional that it told him everything about how much effort it was taking. "The closeout invoice for Friday," Daniel said. "The florist's final number. Did it come in yet?" It was an excuse, and they both knew it. It'll be in by Wednesday, Claire said. Right. He stood there. Claire. Daniel. I want to talk about Friday. We handled Friday well. The client sent a thank you email this morning. Elena is back from sick leave, so coverage shouldn't be an issue going forward. I know that's not what you meant. She looked at him with the calm patience of a woman who had decided on a position and was holding it. But I think Friday needs a few more days before it becomes a conversation. We have the Whitmore anniversary event next week, and the corporate holiday rescheduling from December that got pushed, and Rachel Morgan is apparently consulting for the company starting today, which means... She paused. We need Monday to just be Monday. Daniel looked at her. Is that what you actually want, or is that what you're doing because it feels safer? Claire's expression shifted. Just slightly. I'm not sure that question is fair. I'm not sure it isn't. A beat. Monday, she said. Please. He nodded. He went back to his office. He drank the coffee she'd left. The week that followed was a masterclass in the specific torture of knowing something and not being able to do anything useful about it. Rachel's consulting work put her in contact with both of them separately and sometimes together. She was, as Claire had immediately identified, not a villain. She was competent and professional, and occasionally quite funny, and she treated Claire with the genuine regard of someone who had done her research and found it warranted. She treated Daniel with the careful friendliness of two people who had history and had agreed without ever explicitly discussing it to handle that history maturely, which somehow made everything worse, because it gave Claire nothing to push against. No rudeness, no condescension, no territorial behavior that would have let Claire categorize the situation cleanly. Instead, there was Rachel being excellent at her job, and Daniel being professional and focused, and the office gossip machine running at low efficiency on background. On Thursday, Claire overheard two women from accounting talking in the break room. Is that Daniel's ex, the consultant? Rachel something. Yeah. They were together like 2 years ago, before he really focused on the dad thing. God, they looked good together, remember? She's gorgeous. He's obviously still. A pause. I don't know. There's something there. Claire poured her coffee and left. She did not pour it on anyone. This showed considerable restraint. She went back to her office and sat down and opened the budget for the Whitmore event and stared at it for approximately 45 seconds before Vanessa appeared in her doorway. Vanessa Cole had been Claire's best friend for 11 years, her coworker for 3, and her unofficial emotional support system for the entire 23 months of the situation that Vanessa referred to privately as the Daniel problem. She was 32 and direct in the way that some people are direct when they love you enough not to waste your time. She closed the office door behind her. I need you to talk to me, Vanessa said. I'm working. You're staring at a spreadsheet like it wronged you personally. That's different from working. She sat in the chair across the desk. Friday happened. Friday was a professional success. Claire. We saved the event. The client is happy. Elena is back. Everything is fine. Except that Daniel almost said something, and then Rachel Morgan walked out of an elevator and you shut the whole thing down. Claire looked up. How do you know about that? Because you texted me at 11 p.m. saying, everything is fine, which is your personal code for nothing is fine, and I've known you since we were 21. Vanessa leaned forward. Talk. Claire was quiet for a moment. Outside the glass office wall, the company's open floor moved and hummed with the ordinary business of a Monday turned Thursday. Phones rang. The printer ran. Rachel Morgan crossed the far end of the floor with a consultant's brief under her arm, and neither Claire nor Vanessa mentioned it, but both of them saw it. He changed my contact name, Claire said. Vanessa blinked. What? 6 months ago, he changed it. She told Vanessa what it said, all 4 words. Vanessa sat back slowly. Call her coward. Yes. Daniel Hayes saved you in his phone as call her coward. Yes. And didn't call. No. Vanessa looked at the ceiling briefly. Okay, so he's an idiot. He's not an idiot. He's scared. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. Vanessa. I'm just saying. She folded her hands. What are you going to do? I told him to let Monday be Monday. It's Thursday. I'm aware. Claire, you have been in love with this man for nearly 2 years. He has just demonstrated in 2 separate and very concrete ways that he has been hiding the same feeling. Rachel Morgan is a temporary obstacle who is frankly not the issue here. The issue is that you are both so afraid of being wrong that you have both been performing an extended pantomime of friendship that is fooling absolutely nobody, including Sophie, who I am told Daniel last Friday night that he should just ask you out. Claire stared at her. How do you know that? Daniel told Marcus at Columbus Elite, who told his dispatcher who went to school with my cousin. Vanessa spread her hands. Columbus is a big city that operates like a very large small town. This is known. Claire rubbed her face with both hands. I can't just... Claire. It's not simple. If it goes wrong, we lose everything. The friendship, the working relationship, the thing we've built for 2 years that works and is stable and is killing you slowly. Vanessa said, not unkindly. I've watched you delete texts to that man for 18 months. I've watched you talk yourself out of something real because you'd rather have the half version of it than risk losing the half version. She paused. That's not protection. That's just a slower kind of hurt. Claire didn't answer. Vanessa stood up. I am not telling you to run down the hall and declare yourself. I'm telling you that the window that's been closed for 2 years cracked open on Friday night, and the Rachel Morgan factor is going to either push you both through it or slam it shut again, and you don't get to be passive about which one it is. She moved toward the door. Think about that. She left. Claire thought about it. She thought about it through the rest of Thursday and all of Friday morning, and on Friday afternoon she was in the break room when Daniel came in, and they were alone for the first time since Monday, and the room did the thing it always did when they were alone, which was contract slightly, as if physical space had been quietly redistributed. Daniel poured his coffee. He leaned against the counter. How's the Whitmore prep? He said. On track. Venue confirmed, catering booked, AV coordinated. She paused. How's the facilities review for the downtown property? Almost done. 2 more inspections next week. He held his cup. Sophie asked about you. Claire looked at her coffee. Yeah? She wanted to know if you're coming to her soccer game Saturday. Claire was quiet for a moment. Am I invited? I wouldn't have mentioned it if you weren't. A pause. She wants you there. I want you there. Daniel. I know what you said. This isn't me pushing. He met her eyes. I'm asking you to Sophie's soccer game. That's a thing we've done before. That's something that exists in the category of things we do. Another pause. Just come to the game. Claire looked at him for a long moment. The break room was ordinary and fluorescent, and smelled like the burnt edge of the coffee pot, and Daniel Hayes was standing in it with that particular stillness that meant he was more uncertain than he looked. Okay, she said. Okay. She took her coffee and went back to work. He watched her go, and Saturday, she went to the soccer game, and Sophie scored a goal and looked directly at Claire afterward the way 9-year-olds look at the people they most want to impress, and Daniel stood beside Claire on the sideline with their shoulders almost touching in the January cold, and neither of them said anything important, and both of them stayed for hot chocolate after, and it was ordinary, and it was painful, and it was exactly the half version of something real that Vanessa had described. 3 days later, the thing that cracked open. Everything happened in a conference room on the 14th floor. The meeting was a standard quarterly review for the corporate events division. The regional director, a man named Garrett Pace, who had the manner of someone who had been managing upward for so long, he'd forgotten there were other directions, was reviewing the first quarter event campaign results. Claire had spent 2 weeks building the campaign strategy. The advance metrics were the strongest the division had produced in 4 years. Garrett Pace was going over the client presentation schedule when a senior executive named Franklin Webb, who had joined by video call from Chicago, made a comment. For the client dinner in March, Webb said, looking at the screen with the slightly disconnected authority of someone who wasn't physically present and used that as permission to say things he might not have said in the room. We should think about who's out front. Who's greeting at the door, presenting in the first 10 minutes? Optics matter with this client. He paused. Something more camera-friendly. The room went quiet, in the specific way. Rooms go quiet when something has been said that everyone heard and nobody wants to be first to respond to. Claire was sitting 4 seats down from Garrett Pace. She was holding a pen. She set it down. Her face was composed and professional and utterly unreadable. Daniel was sitting across the table. He looked at Claire. Then he looked at Webb's face on the screen. Garrett Pace cleared his throat. "Franklin, we can—" "The campaign performance," Daniel said. "Not loudly, not aggressively. Just clearly the way you speak when you intend to be heard precisely." Webb looked toward him on the screen. "Excuse me, the campaign performance for Q1. Daniel held up the report in front of him. The advance response metrics, the registration numbers, and the projected pledge total. These came from Claire's campaign strategy, which she built and presented and managed from concept to execution. He kept his voice level. "Before we discuss who's camera-friendly at the door, I'd like to make sure we're discussing who earned this account." A beat. Then Claire spoke. "I can run the numbers," she said. Her voice was calm, completely calm. The calm of someone who had just made a decision. She stood up, and she took the report, and she presented the Q1 campaign performance with the precision and fluency of someone who had not only built the strategy, but understood it at every level. She didn't ask anyone in the room to see her differently. She didn't address Webb's comment directly. She simply presented the work clearly and without apology, and let the numbers do what numbers do when they're real. The projected advance response, 43% above the previous year's comparable campaign. The pledge conversion rate, highest in the division's recorded history. The client satisfaction score from the pilot event, 91 out of 100. When she finished, the room was quiet again. A different kind of quiet. "The client should absolutely choose whoever they want front-facing for March," Claire said. "But they should make that choice knowing what this campaign has already delivered." She sat back down. She picked up her pen. Webb was quiet for a moment on the screen. Then, "Send me the full metrics breakdown." "Already in your inbox," Claire said. "I sent them before the meeting." The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Garrett Pace caught up with Claire in the hallway. "The client called," he said. "While you were still presenting. Their director saw the preliminary numbers this morning. They want you to lead the March event." Claire looked at him. "You'll have full authority on the program," Garrett said. "I'll confirm it in writing by end of day." He walked away. Claire stood in the hallway with the pen still in her hand and let herself feel for exactly 3 seconds the enormous quiet satisfaction of a thing going right. Then Daniel appeared at her shoulder. She expected him to say something about the meeting, about what he'd said in the conference room. Instead, he said very quietly, "Parking garage, 5 minutes. I need to tell you something." She looked at him. "Please," he said. She went. The parking garage was cold and half empty and smelled like concrete and exhaust, which was not what you'd choose for the conversation that followed. But sometimes the places where things happen are not the places you'd design for them. Daniel was waiting at the 3rd level near the stairwell. Claire walked toward him with her coat on and the pen still in her hand, and an expression that was carefully neutral while her heart was doing something she was trying not to acknowledge. "Rachel told me something," Daniel said, "when I talked to her, last week." "Okay." "She said I was never fully present when we were together. That she could tell even at the beginning that there was something I was holding back." He paused. "I thought it was grief. I thought it was Melissa. I thought it was just the part of me that was reserved for Sophie." He looked directly at her. "She said it wasn't any of those things. She said it was like I'd already given that part away to someone who didn't know they had it." Claire held very still. "I thought about it for a week," Daniel said. "I kept thinking she was wrong, that she was being retrospectively generous or trying to make the breakup into a story that made her feel better about it. But she wasn't being generous. She was being honest." He stepped closer. Not too close. Close enough. And she was right. The parking garage was quiet. Somewhere below them, a car door closed. "I have been in love with you," Daniel said, for a very long time. Not because of Friday night. Not because I borrowed your phone and found something I wasn't supposed to see. Not because Rachel didn't work out. Those things happened, and they're part of the sequence, but they're not the reason. His voice was steady and unhurried, and carried the weight of something that had been stored under pressure for a long time. The reason is that you are the person I think about when something goes wrong and when something goes right, and in the ordinary middle part where nothing is happening. The reason is 20 months of coffee cups and broken brads and Saturday soccer games, and a name I changed in my phone 6 months ago because I finally got honest with myself, even if I couldn't get honest with you. Claire's jaw was tight. Her eyes were bright. I'm not Rachel's leftover, he said. I'm not a man who noticed you when nothing better was available. I am a man who has been a coward for 6 months about something that matters more to him than he knew how to say. A pause. I'm saying it now. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture, that you can feel against your skin. Then Claire said, "If this goes wrong, Daniel, I know. We lose. I know what we lose. I've thought about it every day for 6 months." He didn't look away. I've also thought about what I'm losing every day I don't say it. Claire looked at him. This man she'd been making coffee for and fixing appointments around and silently, privately, furiously loving for nearly 2 years. This man who was scared in exactly the same way she was scared and had hidden it in exactly the same way and had named the hiding thing in his phone so he'd have to look at it every day. She said, "You're a coward, Daniel Hayes." "Yes," he said. "I am. And I have been saving your number under a drunk texting warning for 14 months. I know. Which means," she said, "we're both idiots." Probably. The beginning of a smile moved across her face. Just the beginning of one. The kind that arrives before you decide to allow it. "Don't mess this up," she said. "I'll do my absolute best." She stepped forward. He met her halfway. And the first time Daniel Hayes kissed Claire Bennett, they were standing in a parking garage in January in Columbus, Ohio, and she was still holding a pen, and his hands were slightly cold from the concrete air, and neither of them cared about any of it. It wasn't glamorous. It was real. And real, it turned out, was the only thing either of them had actually wanted. The kiss lasted about 4 seconds, which was long enough to be real and short enough that neither of them panicked. When they stepped back, Claire was still holding the pen, and Daniel's hands were in his coat pockets, and they looked at each other with the particular expression of two people who have just crossed a line they cannot uncross and are taking a moment to inventory how they feel about that. "Okay," Claire said. "Yeah," Daniel said. "So that happened." It did. She looked down at the pen in her hand. Then she looked back up at him. "I'm going back to my office now." "That's probably the right call. And we're going to be normal about this. Completely normal. Because we still have the Whitmore event next week, and the Q1 client presentation, and Rachel Morgan in our building 3 days a week. All true. And I need to think. Take whatever time you need." She nodded once. She turned and walked back toward the elevator. 3 steps away, she stopped. "Daniel." "Yeah." She didn't turn around. "Don't take it back by tomorrow morning." He didn't hesitate. "Not a chance." She went back to her office. He stood in the parking garage for another full minute before he could make himself move. His chest felt like something that had been clenched for a very long time had finally unclenched, and the new space where the tension used to be was strange and tender and terrifyingly alive. He went back to work. He burned through 3 tasks in 90 minutes and got a compliment from Garrett Pace on the facilities review. He turned in and texted Sophie's aftercare that he'd be there at 5:30, and all of it was normal and professional, and beneath every single second of it, he was thinking about 4 seconds in a parking garage and a woman who'd said, "Don't take it back." He wasn't going to take it back. Not ever. The following 2 weeks were the best and most complicated of Daniel's recent life, in the way that things are complicated when they're real, instead of theoretical. Dating Claire Bennett. And they were dating, though they hadn't used that word out loud yet. It simply emerged from the sequence of things that followed. The parking garage was different from knowing Claire Bennett. Not worse. Deeper. The way a photograph is different from the actual place. She came to dinner at his house the following Thursday. Sophie opened the door before Claire could knock because she had been watching for headlights for 20 minutes, which she did not admit, but which was obvious from her position in the hallway when the doorbell rang. She was wearing her soccer jersey and holding a book she had not been reading. "You came," Sophie said. "You invited me," Claire said. "Dad invited you. I endorsed the invitation." Sophie stepped back to let her in with the proprietary grace of a 9-year-old who considers herself co-host. He burned the first batch of garlic bread. "Sophie," Daniel called from the kitchen. "It's recoverable," Sophie said confidentially. Claire laughed and came inside, and the house smelled like pasta sauce and the specific warmth of a home that is used and lived in and not merely occupied. She sat at the counter while Daniel cooked, and Sophie narrated everything simultaneously. Her homework folder opened beside her, explaining her math assignment to Claire, with the confidence of someone who understands the material and simply wants an audience. It was ordinary. That was the thing about it. It was so completely ordinary that Daniel had to keep stopping himself from looking at Claire too long, because when he looked at her sitting at his counter, talking to his daughter about long division, he felt something so large and simple that it made the previous 20 months of careful restraint seem like the saddest kind of waste. They ate dinner. Sophie beat Claire at 2 rounds of a card game she'd invented herself, the rules of which shifted conveniently in Sophie's favor whenever the situation required. Claire protested both rulings with great sincerity and lost with the dignity of someone who suspects they've been had but can't prove it. Daniel did the dishes. Claire helped without being asked. Sophie supervised from the table, still working on her homework, occasionally reading problems aloud, as though seeking a second opinion on whether mathematics was genuinely necessary. At 8:30, Daniel took Sophie through the bedtime routine, while Claire waited in the living room. When he came back, she was standing at the bookshelf looking at photographs. She did it quietly without touching anything in the way of someone who understands that other people's photographs are personal geography. "You don't have to," he started. "I'm not uncomfortable," she said. "I want to see." She was looking at one specific frame, Sophie at maybe age 3, grinning at the camera with the particular abandon of a child who has just done something hilarious. The woman holding her was blonde and laughing, caught mid-motion, clearly not posed. "That's Melissa," Daniel said. He'd moved to stand beside her without deciding to. His voice was steady. "Sophie's birthday party. She'd just knocked a cupcake off the table. She looks like Sophie." "Sophie looks like her." He paused. "That's not a sad thing to say. I know it might sound like it is. It doesn't." Claire looked at the photograph a moment longer. Then she turned to look at him. "Are you okay with all of this? You asking about Melissa? I'm asking about whether you're ready, really ready, not just parking garage ready." She held his gaze. Those are different levels. Daniel thought about that. About the honest answer, which was that ready wasn't a state he expected to achieve cleanly. That some part of him would probably always carry some form of the weight of what he'd lost. The way fractures in bone leave a permanent mark in the density of the healed place. But carrying something and being stopped by it were different things, and he'd figured out the difference somewhere in the 4 years since that Wednesday when everything changed. "I'm ready," he said. "Not because I've finished grieving something, because I finished using it as a reason not to try." Claire looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around him, and he held her, and it was the first time he'd held someone like that in 4 years, and it felt nothing like what he'd been afraid it would feel like. It felt like arriving somewhere he'd been traveling toward without a map. She left at 10. He walked her to the car. She said goodnight, and he said goodnight, and she drove away, and he stood on the porch in the cold for about 30 seconds before going back inside, which was 30 seconds of standing in the cold that he didn't regret at all. That was the beginning. What followed the beginning was the part nobody narrates, which is the part where two people who are genuinely good at being individuals try to figure out how to be two people together without losing themselves in the process. It was messier than the parking garage moment. It was also more real. Daniel's first instinct, which emerged within the first 10 days with a clarity that surprised him, was to protect. Not Claire from the world. Claire from everything. from the looks that sometimes landed on her in meetings when she took up space confidently, from comments made in hallways that were disguised as jokes, from the occasional client who spoke to the person beside her instead of directly to her as if she required an interpreter. He wanted to insert himself between her and all of it. Claire noticed within the first week. They were in a vendor meeting mid-February, reviewing the catering contract for the March client dinner, and Daniel interrupted twice when the vendor's account manager addressed questions to Daniel instead of Claire, even though the event was Claire's project and the questions were about Claire's specifications. After the meeting, walking back to the car, Claire said, "You're doing the thing." Daniel looked at her. "What thing?" "The defensive thing, where you insert yourself." The guy was, "I know what the guy was doing. I've been dealing with guys who do that thing my entire professional life. I know how to handle it." "I know you do. You wanted to help." "Yes." "Daniel." She stopped walking, turned to face him. "I don't need you to fight for me. I need you to stand beside me while I fight for myself. Those are completely different jobs." He looked at her. He understood intellectually the distinction she was drawing. He also felt simultaneously the instinct to keep doing what he'd been doing, because the instinct was not about logic. It was about the way her face had looked in the conference room that January day when Webb had said something, none of them addressed directly, and the way Claire had smiled professionally and said nothing, and the way Daniel had seen the smallest possible contraction in her expression that told him she'd absorbed it and filed it away in the place where she kept everything she absorbed. "What if I'm not great at that?" he said. "The standing beside part versus the stepping in part. What if I've been doing it wrong and I don't know how to stop immediately?" She looked at him. "Then you tell me when you mess it up and we figure it out. And you tell me when I'm doing it without knowing." "Deal." She started walking again. He fell into step beside her. "The catering manager," he said. "Was he doing it on purpose, or was it unconscious?" "Unconscious," she said immediately. "Unconscious is worse in some ways. Conscious you can argue with. Unconscious just keeps happening because nobody told their assumptions they were wrong." "How do you—" He paused. "How do you not let it get inside you?" Claire was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet she got when she was thinking seriously, not deflecting. "Sometimes I don't," she said. "Sometimes I drive home and I'm furious, and I call Vanessa, and I say things that would not be appropriate in a professional setting. A beat. And then I sleep and I get up the next day, and I know what I did and what I'm worth, and I go back in." She glanced at him. "The secret isn't that it doesn't land. The secret is landing doesn't mean staying." Daniel thought about that for the rest of the drive. They were 3 weeks in when Rachel Morgan did something that nobody expected. It was a Tuesday late afternoon, and Claire was in the break room eating a very late lunch that had been delayed by 3 separate crises, and Rachel came in for coffee, and they were alone together for the first time without Daniel anywhere nearby. Claire had been ready for awkwardness. She'd prepared for professional friendliness, deployed with the careful precision of 2 women navigating shared geography. What she had not prepared for was Rachel setting her coffee cup down and saying with the directness of someone who doesn't have the patience for circling the subject, "How long have you been in love with him?" Claire set down her fork. "Excuse me. I'm not being aggressive," Rachel said. "I'm asking because I want to tell you something and the context matters." Claire looked at her. "About 2 years," she said finally. Rachel nodded, like this confirmed what he suspected. "He never talked about you directly when we were together. That was the first thing I noticed. The people who matter most to someone are either always in the conversation or they're never in it. With Daniel, you were never in it." She poured her coffee, "Which meant you were always in it." Claire absorbed this. "What did you want to tell me?" Rachel turned to face her. "When Daniel and I were together, I used to describe him to my friends as emotionally unavailable. I said it like it was a character flaw, like something was broken in him." She paused. "I was wrong. I wasn't unavailable. He was specific. He'd already, even if he hadn't admitted it to himself, he'd already given the available part away." "Rachel, I'm not saying this to be gracious. I'm saying it because I spent 8 months being frustrated with a man for something that wasn't his fault and wasn't mine. It just was what it was. She picked up her cup. He's different with you. I can see it from 30 feet away. He stays in his own body when he's around you. With me, there was always some part of him somewhere else. Claire was quiet. I don't need your gratitude, Rachel said. I just thought you should know that the thing you probably still wonder about, whether you're a substitute, whether you're the consolation version you're not. You're the original. She moved towards the door. Anyway, she walked out. Claire sat alone in the break room for 2 minutes, which was 2 minutes longer than her lunch break allowed, and did not move. Then she picked up her fork, finished her lunch, and went back to work. She didn't tell Danielle about the conversation right away. She let it settle. Let it become something she'd processed, rather than something she was still reacting to. Because the thing about Rachel's words was that they landed in a very specific place, the place where Claire had always been most uncertain. The place where the voice that sounded like self-protection, but was actually just fear, had been loudest for the longest time. She told him Sunday evening sitting on his back porch with coffee while Sophie was at Karen's for the night. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" he said. "I'm better than okay." She looked at him. "She was right, you know. I need you to know that I know she was right. Not because I need to be reassured. Because you should know I believe you. Not just in the parking garage, not just because the timing worked out. I believe the reason." Daniel turned his coffee cup in his hands. "I should have said it 2 years ago." "You weren't ready 2 years ago." "I don't know that." "I do." She looked at him directly. 2 years ago, you were still figuring out who you were after everything. You were still building yourself back up. If you'd said it 2 years ago, it might have been about needing something instead of choosing something. There's a difference. She paused. Now you're choosing. He looked at her. Yeah. So am I, she said. They stayed on the porch until the temperature made staying impractical, and then they went inside, and it was a Sunday evening in February, in Columbus, Ohio, unremarkable in every external way, and it was one of the best nights of either of their lives. March came with the client dinner, which Claire led entirely. She was in charge of the program, the introduction sequence, and the presentation of the campaign results to a table of 12 corporate executives who had the financial power to either expand or terminate a contract that represented a significant portion of the division's annual revenue. Daniel was there in a supporting capacity, handling the logistics side available if needed but not in front. He watched her work. He had watched her work hundreds of times. He thought he knew what he was watching. But something was different now, that he wasn't performing the careful non-watching of someone pretending not to care, and what he saw watching without pretense was extraordinary. She commanded the room, not by overwhelming it, but by being so completely at home in it, that the room reorganized around her confidence. She read the table within 4 minutes of sitting down, who needed data, who needed narrative, who needed to feel heard before they could hear anything. She adjusted her delivery for each person without making any of them feel managed. She was funny at precisely the right moments, and serious at precisely the right moments, and she never once checked Daniel's face for reassurance. The client renewed the contract, expanded it by 30%. The senior director shook Claire's hand at the end of the evening and said she ran the best client engagement event he'd attended in 8 years. Afterward, in the hotel corridor, just the two of them, while the rest of the team did the closeout. Daniel said, "That was remarkable. The numbers were solid. They sell themselves." "I'm not talking about the numbers." She looked at him. "You walked in there knowing exactly what you were doing," he said. "No performance, no armor, just you." Claire was quiet for a second. "I was nervous for about 10 minutes before we sat down." "I know. You chewed your thumbnail in the elevator. You noticed that. I notice everything about you. I've been noticing everything about you for 2 years. I'm apparently incapable of not noticing." She looked at him for a moment, and then she laughed, the real laugh, the one that started in her eyes. "You're extremely sentimental for a facilities coordinator." "Senior facilities coordinator." "My apologies." He smiled. She smiled. And then something happened that neither of them had planned, and that would matter more than either of them understood in the moment. Sophie called. She was at Karen's and had woken up from a bad dream and wanted her dad, which was completely expected and completely reasonable. And Daniel answered immediately and talked to her in his quiet voice, the one he used at 3 a.m, patient and steady and warm. And Claire stood 3 feet away, listening without trying to listen and watching Daniel Hayes talk his daughter through a nightmare with the same total commitment he brought to everything that mattered to him. She understood something she hadn't quite understood before. This was the life, not the dramatic moments, not the parking garage and the ballroom and the charged silences in break rooms. This was it. A hotel corridor at 10 p.m. A bad dream. A man who picked up immediately every single time. And the question she'd been carrying underneath everything else. Not whether Daniel loved her, she'd stopped doubting that, but whether she could truly fit into the shape of his life, whether there was real room for her in a world built around a 9-year-old who had already lost one person she loved. That question shifted. Not because the answer changed, because the question itself changed. She wasn't trying to fit into the shape of his life. They were building a new shape together, one that included all 3 of them. Daniel got off the phone. She's okay. Karen's with her. Good. I should probably go, Claire said. Go be with your kid. The after event. Handled. Marcus has the transportation. Jim's on AV. I'll do the venue sign-off. Go. He looked at her with the expression she'd come to recognize as the one he used when he was too full of something to fit it into the available words. Drive safe, she said. Claire, Daniel, go. He went. She did the venue sign-off. She signed the vendor paperwork. She confirmed the equipment return schedule, and the catering invoice, and the AV equipment manifest. She did it efficiently and professionally, and when the last vendor was out the door, and the venue director had his copies, and the elevator came, she stepped in alone and let herself feel in the full privacy of 40 floors of descent, the enormous, terrifying, joyful fact of loving someone completely. It was enormous. It was also, she was discovering, not as heavy as she'd expected. The weight she'd been carrying for 2 years was the weight of wanting something and believing she couldn't have it. The thing itself, the actual loving, the actual being loved back, was a different kind of weight entirely. The kind that balances rather than burdens. The elevator opened. She walked through the hotel lobby and out into the March night, which was cold, but less bitterly cold than January had been, which meant Columbus was finally beginning its slow negotiation with spring. She drove home. She changed out of her event clothes. She made tea. She sat on her couch in the particular quiet of a night that has gone well, and she picked up her phone and she looked at Daniel's contact. Still saved as Daniel Don't Text Him Drunk. She'd been meaning to change it for weeks. She opened the edit screen. She deleted the old name. She typed the new one. Saved it. Put the phone down. She did not analyze it. She did not second-guess it. She had decided, and she had acted on the decision. And that was the thing about choosing something with your whole self instead of half of it. It was surprisingly clean. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up. It was from Daniel. Sophie's asleep. Karen made her hot chocolate, and she was out in 10 minutes. Thank you for tonight. The contract, the presentation, all of it. You were extraordinary. She typed back. It was a good night. He replied almost immediately. Yeah, it was. Then after a pause of about 30 seconds. What are you doing Saturday? She smiled. Nothing you don't plan to interrupt. His response. Good. Sophie wants to teach you the rules of her card game, the actual rules, not the ones she makes up mid-game. Those are the same rules. You know that I know that Sophie denies it. Claire laughed out loud in her empty apartment. She set the phone down. She finished her tea. She went to bed. At some point, she picked the phone up once more before sleep and looked at his contact name again, just briefly confirming the new version was real. It was. She turned the screen off. 2 days later, the thing that none of them saw coming hit them from a direction none of them had been watching. It was a Thursday morning, and Daniel was in Garrett Pace's office for what he'd been told was a routine quarterly check-in. He went in with his facilities review, his Q2 projections, his maintenance timeline for 3 properties. He came out 20 minutes later with none of that having been discussed. He sat at his desk for 11 minutes before texting Claire. "Can you come to my office when you have 5 minutes?" She appeared in 4. She closed the door behind her, which told him she'd read something in the text. She sat in the chair across from him. "What happened?" Daniel set his hands flat on the desk. "Garrett had a conversation with me." "About?" "Chicago." Claire went still. "The regional director position in the Great Lakes Division," Daniel said. "It's been open for 8 months. They've been looking internally. Apparently they've been looking at me for the last 4. He paused. "Garrett made me a formal offer this morning." The office was quiet. "Chicago," Claire said. "Significant salary increase, director title, full authority over 5 properties across 3 states." He held her gaze. "It's the biggest professional opportunity I've been offered, by a significant margin." Claire said nothing. She was very still in the way she got when she was processing, rather than reacting, and Daniel watched her face with the attention of a man who understood that what happened in the next 2 minutes was going to matter more than the previous 4 years. "When do they need an answer?" she said. 2 weeks. She nodded slowly. She looked at her hands, then back up at him. "Daniel, I'm not asking your permission," he said carefully. "I want to be clear about that. I'm also not making this decision alone." She looked at him. "We're a team," he said. "That's not a speech. That's just the truth. And nobody on a team makes a decision this size without the team." The word "we" sat in the room between them. Claire pressed her lips together. One breath in, one out. "What do you want to do?" "I want to know what we want to do." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have right now that's honest." He leaned forward slightly. "I've made major decisions alone for 4 years. I'm good at it. I'm also done with it." He paused. "I want to bring you and Sophie to the kitchen table and figure this out the way people figure things out when they're building something together." Claire stared at him for a long moment. Something was moving through her expression that she wasn't fully controlling, which was rare enough that he cataloged it carefully. "You brought Sophie into it," she said. "She's involved. You're involved. I'm involved." His voice was quiet and certain. "That's the team." Her jaw worked slightly. "Daniel, we've been together 6 weeks." "I know." "That's for most people. 6 weeks isn't." "I know. You can't restructure a major career decision around 6 weeks." "I can restructure it around 26 months, he said. 6 weeks is how long we've been honest about it. The rest of the time still counts." Claire's eyes were bright. She blinked once deliberately. "That's not fair." "Which part?" "The part where you say something that makes it impossible to argue with you rationally." He almost smiled. "Kitchen table. You, me, Sophie. Saturday morning. We talk through it like adults and we figure out what's right." She looked at him. She looked like she wanted to say something else and was deciding whether this was the moment for it. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." She stood. She moved to the door. Then she stopped with her hand on the frame, her back to him, and she said very quietly to the door frame, rather than to him directly, "I'm not going to be the reason you don't take an opportunity like that. I need you to know that going in." He looked at her back, at the set of her shoulders, at the particular posture of a woman who had spent years making herself smaller to avoid inconveniencing people. "And I need you to know," he said, "that you're not a variable. I'm working around. You're part of what I'm deciding toward." She didn't respond. She stood there for one more beat. Then she walked out. He heard her footsteps down the hall. He heard her office door close. He looked at his desk. At the facilities review he hadn't needed. At the Q2 projections that seemed suddenly very small against the size of what Saturday morning was going to be. He picked up his phone. He looked at Claire's contact. Claire, call her coward. Still there. He'd been meaning to update it for weeks. He opened the edit screen. He deleted the old label. He looked at the blank field for a moment, thinking about the right word, the one that was true without being a performance. He typed one word. He saved it. He put the phone down. Saturday was 2 days away. He had a lot to figure out before then. And for the first time in 4 years, he wasn't figuring it out alone. Saturday arrived the way important mornings always do, ordinary on the outside, loaded underneath. Daniel made pancakes, because pancakes were Sophie's preferred breakfast for serious conversations, a pattern that had emerged organically over 4 years and had never been formally acknowledged, but was understood by both of them. Sophie appeared at 7:45 in her soccer jersey and sat at the kitchen table with the focused attention of someone who had been told this morning mattered and had decided to take that seriously. Claire arrived at 8. She knocked. Sophie answered before Daniel could get to the door. She led Claire to the table with the efficiency of a child who had a clear vision of how this morning was supposed to go and wasn't planning to leave room for awkwardness. "Pancakes," Sophie announced. "Dad made the good ones with the crispy edges." "The edges are the best part," Claire said. "That's what I always say." Sophie sat back down. "Dad overcooks the centers sometimes." "Sophie," Daniel said from the stove, "it's a fact, not a criticism." Claire sat. Daniel plated the pancakes. They ate the three of them with the particular normalcy of a Saturday morning that was not yet what it was about to become, and nobody rushed it because all three of them, including Sophie, were aware that some moments need to be inhabited before they can be resolved. At 9:15, Daniel cleared the plates. He came back to the table and sat down. He looked at Claire across from him and Sophie to his left, her elbows on the table, watching both adults with the patient attentiveness of a child who has learned that the most important information is usually in what people do right before they speak. "There's something I need to talk through with both of you," Daniel said. Sophie straightened slightly. Daniel walked them through it. The offer, the title, the salary increase he didn't give them a specific number for but characterized as significant. The scope of the role. The fact that it would require relocating to Chicago within 60 days of acceptance. Sophie's face went through 3 expressions in about 4 seconds. Interest calculation, and then something quieter that Daniel recognized as the expression she made when she was doing the specific math of whether something was going to change her life. "Chicago," Sophie said. "Chicago. My school is here. I know. Mia's here, and Coach Torres, and my team." She paused. "And Karen." "All true." Sophie looked at Claire. "Would you come?" The question landed in the room with the weight that only a 9-year-old's direct question can carry, because children don't package their real questions in polite conversational wrapping. They just ask the thing. Claire looked at Sophie steadily. "That's part of what your dad and I need to figure out." "But would you want to?" "Sophie," Daniel started. "It's a fair question," Claire said. She kept her eyes on Sophie. "Honestly, I don't know yet. That's also part of what we need to figure out." She paused. "What I do know is that what your dad and I decide, we're going to decide together. And you're part of together. So your answer to the Chicago question matters too." Sophie considered this with a 9-year-old's complete seriousness. "I don't want to go," she said. "But I also don't want to be the reason Dad doesn't do something that's good for him." She looked at Daniel. "Is it something that's good for you?" Daniel looked at his daughter. "It's a big opportunity." "That's not the same as good for you." He stopped. "You're 9. "I'm almost 10. Answer the question." Daniel sat back. He thought about Garrett's office and the title and the number on the offer letter that was still sitting in his desk drawer. He thought about the question beneath the offer, which was the question it always was. When opportunity arrived, is this the thing I've been building toward, or is it the thing that looks like that from a distance? "I don't know," he said honestly. Sophie nodded. Like this was actually the answer she'd been waiting for. "Then we should figure that out first," she said. "Before we figure out Chicago." The room was quiet for a moment. Claire was looking at Sophie with the expression she got when Sophie said something that was more incisive than expected. She looked at Daniel. He looked back at her. "She's right," Claire said. "I know." "So." Claire folded her hands on the table. "Is it the thing, or does it look like the thing?" Daniel took a slow breath. "It's a director role. I've been working toward director level for 6 years. The scope is real, the responsibility is real, the salary is a 40% increase. He paused. And every time I try to feel excited about it, I end up thinking about what I'd be leaving. The job here, Claire said carefully. Not making it about herself. Making sure it wasn't only about herself. The job, this table, Sophie's school, Karen being 12 minutes away. He held Claire's gaze. You. Sophie made a sound that was almost a word, and then converted it to a cough very unconvincingly. I can hear you, Daniel told her. I didn't say anything, Sophie said. Claire was looking at the table, thinking. Daniel knew the specific quality of her thinking silences. By now she went inward, not to disappear, but to assemble. When she looked back up, she had the expression of someone who has decided to say the true thing, regardless of whether it costs her. I told you in your office that I wouldn't be the reason you don't take this, she said. I meant it. I still mean it. She held up one hand before he could speak. And I also need to tell you something else, which is that I know what it looks like when someone is performing enthusiasm about a decision they haven't actually made, and Daniel, you are performing right now. He looked at her. You've been talking about this opportunity the way you'd describe a good stock investment, she said. Solid numbers, good metrics, logical move. Not the way you talk about things that actually matter to you. She paused. The way you talk about Sophie's soccer. The way you talked about this house when you first bought it. The way you talked last November about the Riverside Gala after we pulled it off. She kept her eyes on his. You don't sound like that about Chicago. The kitchen was very quiet. Sophie was watching her father with the careful attention of a child reading a parent. Daniel looked at Claire for a long time. She didn't look away. She had the patience of someone who had decided not to need the answer to go a particular direction, which was rarer than it sounded. No, he said finally. I don't. Okay, she said simply. But it's still the biggest offer I've had. I know. Walking away from it without a reason. You have reasons. You just haven't decided if you're allowed to use them. That landed. He felt it land in the specific place where true things land differently from merely accurate ones. Sophie said very quietly, Dad, do you want to go? He looked at his daughter. At her face, which was Melissa's, and also entirely her own. At the 9 years of mornings and bad dreams and burned toast and good pancakes and soccer goals and homework and laughter that sat behind that question. No, he said. The word came out quiet and certain, and a little bit raw the way words do when you've been holding them back and they finally get through. Then don't, Sophie said, as if this were simple, because to her it was. Claire said nothing. She just looked at him with the expression of someone who had known the answer for 2 days and had waited for him to get there himself, because she understood that some things a person has to say out loud in their own time. There's a counteroffer conversation I haven't had yet, Daniel said. There may be room to negotiate something here. A title track, adjusted responsibilities, a number closer to what Chicago offered. Have you asked? Claire said. Not yet. Why not? Because I was trying to decide whether I wanted Chicago before I found out whether there was a reason to stay. Claire tilted her head slightly. And now? Now I know what I want. He glanced at Sophie, then back to Claire. Now I go have the conversation. Sophie picked up her fork and started on the last bit of pancake she'd been ignoring during the entire exchange, with the satisfaction of a child whose instincts have been confirmed. Garrett's pretty reasonable, she said, as if she had a working professional relationship with Daniel's regional director. How do you know anything about Garrett? Daniel asked. You talk about work at dinner sometimes. I listen. She ate the last bite. He approved the facilities upgrade on the downtown property when you made the case for it. That means he responds to evidence. She set her fork down. Make the case. Daniel stared at his daughter. Claire was pressing her lips together in a way that meant she was very close to laughing. Almost 10, Sophie reminded him. He shook his head. He looked at Claire. You okay with all of this? I'm more than okay, she said. And she meant it the way she meant things when she'd decided to stop hedging completely without the fine print. Daniel reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Sophie watched this with an expression she was trying to make neutral and not quite succeeding at. "Stop monitoring us," Daniel told her. "I'm not monitoring. I'm observing. There's a difference." "There really isn't." "I'm almost 10," he and Claire said simultaneously. Sophie grinned. It was her mother's grin, and Daniel's stubbornness, and entirely her own person all at once. And the sight of it on that Saturday morning in his kitchen with Claire's hand under his was so thoroughly the life he wanted that it almost hurt to look at directly. Monday morning, Daniel walked into Garrett Pace's office without an appointment and closed the door. Garrett looked up from his computer. He read Daniel's expression and closed the laptop. "You're going to decline Chicago," Garrett said. "I'm going to propose an alternative." Garrett leaned back. "Talk." Daniel laid it out. He'd spent Sunday evening building it, not performing the preparation, actually doing it the way Claire had described the difference between genuine work and the appearance of it. He'd pulled the division's 3-year performance data. He'd mapped the structural gap in the Columbus region's senior management. He'd put together a role description that addressed a real organizational need with specifics precise enough to be defensible. Director of Regional Operations, Great Lakes East, based in Columbus. Oversight of 6 properties across Ohio and Indiana. A salary range that was, he acknowledged, not 40% over current, but was a meaningful increase and could be revisited at 12 months. Garrett listened without interrupting. When Daniel finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You built this over the weekend," Garrett said. "Yes." "It's thorough." "The need is real. It's not a constructed position." Garrett looked at the document. He turned 2 pages. He looked at the compensation range. "I can't get you to the Chicago number." "I know. This range is realistic, but I'll need to run it through regional HR and the VP." "I understand." "And you're certain about Chicago?" "I'm certain about what I'm building here," Daniel said. "That's not the same as certain about Chicago, but it's enough." Garrett looked at him for a moment, with the expression of a man who has been in management long enough to recognize when someone knows what they actually want, versus when they're performing the knowledge. "Give me a week," Garrett said. "Thank you." Daniel stood to leave. "Hayes." Garrett picked up the document again. "This is good work. Whatever you decided and why you decided it, this is a serious proposal." "Thank you, Garrett." He walked back to his desk. He texted Claire one word, "Done." She replied in 30 seconds. How'd it go? He's taking it to HR. 1 week. A pause. "Then you okay?" "I thought about it." He looked around the office, the floor plan he'd worked on for 3 years, the properties he could describe from memory, the hallway where Claire's office door was currently open, and he could see the edge of her chair, and the corner of her monitor, and the coffee cup she'd definitely already had twice this morning. "Yeah," he typed back. "Really okay." The week that followed was its own kind of suspense. Daniel worked. Claire worked. They had dinner twice, once at his place, and once at a Thai restaurant on 5th that Sophie had been requesting for a month, and finally got on a Wednesday when Karen covered pickup. They talked about things that had nothing to do with Chicago, and things that did in the way of people who are learning to let all the different sizes of conversation coexist. On Wednesday night at the Thai restaurant, Sophie ordered pad CEW and negotiated a dessert clause up front before the entrees arrived, which Daniel agreed to, with the weary patience of a man who has been out-negotiated by the same person too many times to pretend otherwise. While they waited for food, Sophie looked at Claire and said with the bluntness that had characterized every important thing she'd said in the last 2 weeks, "Do you want to live with us someday?" The restaurant ambient noise continued. A table over someone laughed at something. Daniel's chopsticks stopped moving. Claire held Sophie's gaze. "Where did that come from?" "I've been thinking about it," Sophie said. "Because things are different now, and I want to know what different means going forward." "That's a fair question," Claire said carefully. "You don't have to answer it right now," Daniel said, looking at Claire with an expression that was trying to communicate that this was not a coordinated question, that Sophie had taken this in her own direction, on her own schedule, which she did with everything. "It's okay," Claire said. She looked back at Sophie. "Honestly, yes. Someday, if it makes sense for all of us, and the time is right. That's something I'd want." Sophie nodded. slowly, like she was filing it. Okay, okay, Claire said. I just needed to know if you were temporary, Sophie said. Some people are temporary, I can tell usually, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't wrong about you. The honesty of it was so complete that neither Daniel nor Claire could immediately respond. You're not wrong, Claire said finally. Sophie picked up her chopsticks. Good. The pad CU here is really good. You should get it next time. Daniel exhaled quietly. Claire looked at him across the table with the expression of a woman who has just been assessed by a 9-year-old and is deeply moved by having passed. He reached under the table and found her hand and held it, and she let him and Sophie pretended not to notice, but she was smiling into her water glass. Friday afternoon, Garrett called Daniel into his office. Daniel sat across the desk. Garrett had a printed document in front of him that he turned around and pushed across. Director of Regional Operations, Great Lakes East. The title was there. The compensation was $3,000 below the top of the range Daniel had proposed, which was within negotiating distance of acceptable and indicated that HR had taken it seriously. The 12-month review clause was included. The property oversight scope matched what he'd proposed, with one addition, a fourth Ohio property that had been underperforming and needed senior attention, which actually strengthened the case for the role's necessity. The VP approved it, Garrett said, effective 1st of next month. Daniel looked at the document. He looked at his name above the title. He thought about the offer letter for Chicago still sitting in his desk drawer, the one he'd been meaning to formally decline and hadn't yet. I'll accept, he said. Garrett extended his hand. Daniel shook it. Good decision, Garrett said. I think. I know, Daniel said. He walked back to his desk. He opened his drawer and took out the Chicago offer letter. He wrote his formal decline, which took 6 minutes, and was one of the more deliberately composed things he'd written in recent memory. Professional, grateful, clear. He sent it electronically and followed up with a call to the Chicago regional director that lasted 4 minutes and was equally professional. Then he sat for a moment. Then he got up and walked to Claire's office. He knocked. She looked up. He held up the printed acceptance document. She looked at it. She read the title. She looked at him. Columbus, she said. Columbus, he confirmed. She stood up. She came around the desk. She put her arms around him right there in her office in the middle of the workday, which was the kind of thing neither of them would have done 3 months ago, and which neither of them thought twice about now. Good, she said into his shoulder. Yeah, he said. They stood there for a moment. Vanessa walked past the glass office wall and made a gesture that was probably meant to be subtle and absolutely was not. Neither of them acknowledged it. Sophie's going to want to celebrate, Claire said. She already texted me this morning asking if we'd heard yet. She texted me 20 minutes ago asking if you'd texted you. Daniel laughed. Of course she did. They separated. Claire went back to her desk. Daniel went back to his. The afternoon moved forward in the normal way of Friday afternoons that have resolved something important with the quiet satisfaction of a thing settled correctly. At 5:30, they picked up Sophie from aftercare together, which was something they'd started doing on Fridays, without explicitly deciding to the way most of their habits had formed gradually through repetition, until the pattern became the expectation. Sophie came through the school doors, saw both of them at the car, and broke into a grin that was entirely unguarded. He said yes to Columbus, she announced to Claire, as if Daniel weren't standing right there. I know, Claire said. He told me. I told you first, Sophie said, because I texted you first. You texted me 20 minutes before he told me in person. I'm not sure that counts. It counts, Sophie said firmly. I get credit. She climbed into the back seat. Daniel and Claire got in the front. He started the car. In the rearview mirror, Sophie was arranging her backpack with the focused satisfaction of someone whose world has come out approximately as she'd intended. Dad, Sophie said. Yeah. Can we get the Thai food again tonight? We were literally just there Wednesday. The pad CU was really good. Sophie. I'm just saying. Claire was looking out the passenger window, and her shoulders were doing the thing they did when she was trying not to laugh. "We'll figure out dinner when we get home," Daniel said, which was not a yes, but was also not a no, and Sophie knew the difference, and from the back seat came the small, satisfied sound of someone who considered this a victory. Daniel drove. The city moved past. April had arrived while they were busy with everything else, and Columbus was doing what Columbus does in April, unpredictably, warm 1 hour and cold the next. The trees tentatively beginning to commit to leaves the sky, that particular uncertain blue of a season that hasn't fully decided yet. At a red light, Daniel looked over at Claire. She was watching the city. Profile quiet. The late afternoon light on her face. She felt him looking. She turned. "What?" she said. "Nothing." He looked back at the road. The light changed. "Daniel." "You have a look." "I have a lot of looks." "This is the specific one where you're thinking something you're not saying." He considered denying this and decided it wasn't worth the effort. "I was thinking about your phone," he said. "My phone. The first day, in the car, when the GPS froze." She was quiet for a moment. "That was 4 months ago." "I know. You borrowed my phone and found your name in my contacts and everything changed." "Everything changed," he agreed. She looked out the window again. From the back seat, Sophie was humming something quietly to herself, half present in the way of children who are simultaneously in their own world, and tracking the adult conversation with complete accuracy. "I changed the name," Claire said. He glanced at her. "When?" "The night of the client dinner, March, after I drove home." She paused. "I'd been meaning to change it for weeks." "What's it say now?" She looked at him with the slight smile that had become one of his favorite sights. "You'll see it when you borrow my phone again." "That could take a while." "Maybe. Or maybe I'll leave it somewhere convenient." The car turned onto their street. Sophie had stopped humming and was now looking out her own window with the alert attention of someone who has just realized they're almost home, and the dinner question remains technically unresolved. Dad, she said. "Sophie. The pad see you. We'll see." She made a sound that was the precise verbal equivalent of an eye roll. Daniel pulled into the driveway. Claire was already reaching for the door handle, and Daniel said very quietly just to her, "Claire home." She stopped. She turned and looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen before. Not quite any of the expressions he'd cataloged in 26 months of paying attention. Something new. Something that was past the careful, and past the guarded, and past the 2 years of talking herself out of it. "That's what I saved you as," he said. "In my phone. After the parking garage." His voice was simple and sure. I couldn't think of anything that was true enough until that word. The car was quiet. Sophie, for the first time in living memory, said nothing. Claire looked at him. Her eyes were bright. "You're still a coward, Daniel Hayes," she said, and her voice was warm and fractured and completely honest. "Yeah," he said, "but I'm getting better." She leaned over and she kissed him briefly, and without drama, with Sophie in the back seat, making a sound that was somewhere between disgusted and delighted, and the April evening moving around them, and Columbus being Columbus, ordinary and alive. And whatever came next, the closet negotiations, the burned breakfasts, the homework spread across the kitchen table, the mornings when old fears surfaced, uninvited, the long work of two people, building something real, from something that started with a frozen GPS and a warning in a phone, all of it was waiting on the other side of this driveway. They were going to walk toward it anyway. Together. That was the thing about choosing with your whole self. You didn't need to know the ending. You just needed to know what direction you were walking. And they both knew. The thing about building a life with someone is that nobody warns you about the closets. Claire moved her first boxes into Daniel's house on a Saturday in late May, 14 months after a frozen GPS had forced two people to stop pretending. It wasn't a dramatic move, no moving truck, no ceremony. Just her car loaded with boxes, and Daniel's truck making 2 extra trips for the larger things, and Sophie directing traffic in the front hallway, with the authority of someone who had been planning this reorganization for considerably longer than anyone had asked her to. "The blue boxes are kitchen stuff," Sophie announced. They go in the kitchen. The brown boxes are books. Dad, the bookshelf in the study needs to be cleared first. I cleared it Thursday, Daniel said, carrying a box through the door. You cleared the bottom 2 shelves. There are still 3 shelves of your facilities manuals. Those are reference materials. They are taking up space that Claire's books need. Daniel looked at Claire. Claire pressed her lips together in the specific way she did when she was entirely on Sophie's side, but trying to maintain the appearance of neutrality. Whose house is this? Daniel said. Technically yours, Sophie said. But we've been outvoted. There are 2 of you and 1 of me, which is why you've been outvoted. Sophie picked up a small box labeled Kitchen Fragile and carried it with great seriousness toward the kitchen. The facilities manuals can go in the garage. They cannot go in the garage, it's humid. Then the bottom of the hall closet. That's where the... Daniel. Claire put her hand on his arm briefly without stopping her forward motion. The hall closet is fine. We'll reorganize it. He looked at the back of her head as she followed Sophie toward the kitchen. He said to himself, and he let it sit in his chest for a moment, because it was the kind of word that felt different when it was real. Then he went back to the truck for another box. The facilities manuals ended up in the hall closet. The bookshelf in the study was cleared by noon. Claire's books filled it by 1:30, organized in a way that was different from how Daniel would have done it, but which, when he stood back and looked, was better. He didn't say this out loud because he was choosing his battles, but he thought it with complete sincerity. They ate lunch on this back porch, sandwiches Sophie had assembled with the creative confidence of a person who considers a sandwich a form of self-expression. Claire's had 3 things on it that didn't conventionally belong together and was inexplicably excellent. How? Daniel said, looking at his own more conservative sandwich. It's about the ratio, Claire said. She's been teaching me, Sophie said. Dad's sandwiches are basic. My sandwiches are classic. Those are different things. The afternoon continued in the way of days that matter more than they appear to from the outside. There were boxes that didn't fit where they were supposed to go. There was a lamp whose cord was too short for every viable outlet in the bedroom. There was the discovery at 4 p.m. that 2 of Claire's boxes had been labeled incorrectly and contained winter clothing. She wouldn't need until October, and the winter clothing was now in the kitchen, because Sophie had routed everything by box color. At 4:30, Daniel found Claire sitting on the bedroom floor, surrounded by winter sweaters, looking at a box that said, Bathroom Toiletries, which turned out to contain 3 picture frames and a throw blanket. She looked up at him. He looked at the sweaters. Don't, she said. I didn't say anything. You were about to be reasonable about it, and I don't need reasonable right now. He sat down on the floor across from her. He picked up one of the sweaters, dark red soft, and folded it without comment. She watched him fold it for a moment. Then she picked up another one and started folding too. They sat on the bedroom floor and folded winter sweaters in April, and didn't talk for about 2 minutes, which was one of those silences that doesn't need filling. I labeled all those boxes at 11 p.m., Claire said. I know, because I was nervous and I kept rearranging things. I know. She folded the last sweater and set it on the pile. She looked around the room, her boxes in his room, her lamp with the too short cord, her jewelry dish on his dresser, which she'd placed there 2 hours ago, and which had immediately looked like it had always been there. Is this strange for you? She said. Having someone's things here. Daniel thought about the honest answer, which was that it was strange the way the first morning of a new job is strange. Not wrong, just new, with the particular quality of something that will be normal soon and isn't quite yet. A little, he said. In a good way. Are you sure about the good way? Claire, I need you to be honest. I am being honest. It's different. Different isn't bad. He paused. Sophie moved her good drawing pencils into the study this morning so you'd have somewhere to sit and work if you wanted. She didn't tell me. I found them when I was moving the manuals. Claire went still. She moved her pencils. The good ones. The ones she got for her birthday. Claire looked at her hands. Her jaw worked slightly. She didn't say anything. She didn't do it to get credit. He held her gaze. She did it because she wanted you to have a place. The silence that followed was different from the sweater-folding silence. It had something in it that Claire was trying to manage and wasn't entirely succeeding at. "She's a remarkable kid," Claire said, and her voice was very controlled and also not controlled at all. "Yeah," Daniel said. "She is." Claire nodded once precisely, in the way she did when she was done with the feelings portion of a moment and ready to return to function. She stood up. She picked up the pile of sweaters. Hall closet. Above the facilities manuals. Perfect. She walked out of the room. He heard her in the hallway, heard Sophie's voice asking something, heard Claire's laugh, and he sat on the bedroom floor for another 20 seconds, just listening to the sound of his house with people in it. Then he got up and went to help. The first real argument happened 11 days later. It started about dishes, which was not what it was actually about. But dishes are the traditional opening territory of the larger arguments that two people have when they're learning each other's edges. Claire had been at a vendor meeting until 7, and had come home to find the kitchen in a state that she would describe as creative, and Daniel would describe as in progress. Sophie had made herself pasta for dinner, using every pot apparently available, and Daniel had fielded 3 work calls during the cleanup and had gotten through approximately 40% of it before something else required his attention. And the result was a kitchen that looked like a collaborative art project. Claire came in, set her bag down, assessed the situation, and started cleaning. She didn't say anything, which was in the language of a person raised to go quiet when something bothered them, saying quite a lot. Daniel came in from the living room 15 minutes later and found her finishing the dishes with the particular efficiency of someone channeling a specific feeling into a productive task. "I was going to finish those," he said. "I know," she said. "Claire." I said I know. He stepped into the kitchen. "Talk to me." "I'm fine." "You're doing the quiet thing." She set a bowl in the drying rack with slightly more emphasis than the bowl required. "The quiet thing. The thing you do when something is wrong and you're deciding whether to say it." She turned around. "I had a 7-hour day with a vendor who talked over me in 4 separate meetings, and I came home to a kitchen that looked like a disaster. And I know that's small, and I know that's not a big deal, and I'm cleaning it up because it's fine, and I just needed 5 minutes to be annoyed about it without it becoming a conversation." He looked at her. Okay. You needed 5 minutes. You've had about 15. Are you ready for a conversation now, or do you need more time?" She stared at him. "That is a very irritating response." "Is it wrong?" A beat. Her shoulders dropped slightly from where they'd been. "No," she said. "It's not wrong." She turned back to the counter and dried her hands. "I should have said something when I walked in instead of going quiet, and I should have finished the kitchen." He moved to stand beside her at the counter. "The calls ran long. That's an explanation, not an excuse." She looked at him sideways. "I know the difference." "I know you do." She was quiet for a moment. "The vendor meeting was really bad." "Tell me." She did. She told him about the meeting the way she talked when she'd stopped performing composure directly, specifically with the specific vocabulary of frustration that she was normally careful about. And he listened, the way he listened to things that mattered to him, which was without thinking about what he was going to say next. When she finished, he said, "That guy has done that to you before. Every single meeting for 3 months. You want me to?" "No," she said immediately, and there was warmth in it rather than sharpness. "I know. Stand beside you, not in front of you. I remember." I was going to say, "Do you want me to look at whether there are grounds to escalate the account to a different contact?" She paused. "Oh. Something within your authority and your call. But if there's a structure that removes him from your pipeline..." "That's actually useful," she said. "I can be useful sometimes." "Sometimes," she agreed. And there it was, the tension breaking in the specific way it breaks when two people are learning each other's language and getting better at it in real time. She leaned against him briefly. He put an arm around her. Sophie appeared in the doorway in pajamas, assessed the situation, with the thoroughness of someone who had been listening from the hallway, determined that the adult tension had resolved, and announced that she needed a glass of water, and also that there was a really good show on Netflix that everyone should watch, phrased as a request, but constructed as a directive. They watched the show. Sophie fell asleep 20 minutes into it. Daniel carried her to her room. Claire did not finish the glass of water she'd poured because she'd also fallen half asleep on the couch, and when Daniel came back she was blinking and apologizing for it. "Don't apologize," he said. "I fell asleep on your couch." "Our couch." She looked at him. The word sat between them with the comfortable weight of something that had been true for a while and was only now getting named properly. "Our couch," she repeated. "Come on," he said. "It's late." It was ordinary. It was exactly ordinary. And ordinary, Claire was discovering, was the thing she'd been confusing with not enough. She'd been waiting for dramatic and grand and unmistakable, and what love actually was. It turned out was someone saying our couch at 11 p.m. and meaning it completely. June arrived. Daniel settled into the Director of Regional Operations role, with the focused competence of someone who'd been doing senior work for a while, and had simply been waiting for the title to catch up. The new scope meant more travel day trips, mostly sometimes an overnight to Indianapolis or Cleveland, and the adjustment required renegotiation of routines that had only just been established. Claire handled it better than Daniel expected, which was partly because he'd underestimated her, and partly because she'd told him very clearly in the first week, "When you travel, tell me the schedule so I can plan around it. Don't apologize for traveling. It's your job." "You make it sound simple," he said. "It is simple. You make it complicated when you feel guilty. Stop feeling guilty." "Easy to say." "I know. Do it anyway." He was getting better at it. Sophie, meanwhile, had developed a habit of texting Claire directly when Daniel was traveling, not for emergencies, but for the specific type of information she would previously have stored until his return. A funny thing that happened at school. A question about a book she was reading. A running commentary on the Netflix show they'd started watching together. Claire answered all of them. She answered them the way she did everything Sophie asked of her, which was with complete seriousness and no condescension, and the honest answers rather than the comfortable ones. Daniel found out about the texts on a Tuesday evening in June, when he was in Indianapolis, and called to say goodnight, and Sophie mentioned offhandedly that she and Claire had already settled the argument about the book. "What argument about this book?" he said. "Claire thinks the ending is earned. I think it's too fast. We've been texting about it." "When did you start texting Claire about books?" "Whenever I want to," Sophie said with the simplicity of someone for whom this was not a complex matter. "She reads good. She has opinions." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Does Claire know you text her whenever you want to?" "She has my contact saved," Sophie said. She could not respond. She always responds. He called Claire after. "Did you know Sophie texts you about books?" he said. "We've been discussing one for about 2 weeks," Claire said. "She has genuinely good critical instincts. The ending argument is legitimate." "You've been having a book argument with my 9-year-old for 2 weeks." 10. She turned 10. "I know she turned 10. I was there." "Then say 10. He was smiling. He couldn't help it. "Claire." "Daniel. I love you." I hadn't said it before. They'd been careful with that word, not from withholding, but from the mutual understanding that it was the kind of word you wanted to mean completely when you said it, and that meant waiting until the weight of it matched the word. The line went quiet. "I know," Claire said. Her voice was different, lower. The real voice, not the competent professional one, or even the comfortable evening one. The underneath voice. "I love you too. I've loved you for 2 years. You know that." "I know," he said. I wanted to say it out loud anyway. "Indianapolis," she said. "You pick Indianapolis for this." "I didn't pick it. It came out." She laughed. It started in her eyes, even though he couldn't see her, and he knew it because he knew her. "Get some sleep, Daniel." "Yeah," he said. "Good night, Claire." He lay in the hotel room in Indianapolis, listening to the quiet, and felt something that he'd forgotten was available to him, which was uncomplicated happiness. Not happiness despite things, or happiness around things, or happiness. He'd rationed carefully because too much of it felt like risk. Just happiness, sitting there in his chest, not requiring anything from him. He went to sleep smiling. He drove back to Columbus the next morning. 3 weeks later came the moment that nobody in the story had scripted, and that changed the temperature of everything. It was a Sunday. The kind of quiet Sunday in late June that Columbus does when the weather finally commits to summer, and the three of them were in the kitchen. Sophie at the table finishing a project. Daniel making coffee. Claire standing at the counter going through the week's schedule on her phone, when Sophie looked up from her work and said without preamble or setup, "Claire, can I call you something other than Claire?" The kitchen went very still. Daniel's hand stopped on the coffee pot. Claire lowered her phone. Sophie was looking at her project, not at either of them, in the way she addressed sensitive things obliquely, as if the topic were less fragile if she didn't look directly at it. "What were you thinking?" Claire said. Her voice was completely steady, steadier than it had a right to be. "I don't know," Sophie said. "I was just thinking. You don't have to be Mom. I know you're not. I know there's a difference. But Claire feels like what I call the person who helps at school events. You're something else." She looked up. Her face was open in the particular way of a child asking a real question rather than performing one. "I don't know what word there is for it." The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Claire set her phone down on the counter very carefully. She crossed to the table and sat in the chair across from Sophie. "Can I tell you something?" Claire said. Sophie nodded. "I don't have a word for it either," Claire said. "And I've been thinking about it since before I moved in." She paused. "What I know is that I'm not your mom. Your mom was someone specific and she was yours, and that doesn't change. But I'm also not just the person at school events." She kept her eyes on Sophie's. "Maybe we don't need a word yet. Maybe we figure out what this is by being it for a while, and the word comes later." Sophie considered this. "Or we make one up," she said. "Or we make one up," Claire agreed. Sophie tilted her head. "What if I just called you C?" "C," Claire repeated. "Like not a title, just a letter. Short. Mine." Daniel was standing at the counter watching this exchange with the expression of a man who is trying very hard not to show how much he is affected by what he's witnessing. "C," Claire said again, and this time it sounded different. It sounded like she was trying it on and finding it fit. "I can work with that," Sophie smiled. Not the big performance smile. The real one. The small private one she got when something landed exactly right. She went back to her project. Claire got up. She walked back to the counter. She picked up her phone. She stood beside Daniel, and she did not look at him, because she knew if she looked at him, she was going to have to go somewhere private and feel something very large, very quietly. And they were in the kitchen on a Sunday morning, and Sophie was right there. Daniel put his hand on her back. Just briefly, just for a second. She took a breath. "Coffee's ready," she said. "I know," he said. She poured 2 cups. The Sunday continued. The charity gala arrived in early October, 1 full year after the frozen GPS, the borrowed phone, the warning in the contacts that had started everything. The Riverside Children's Foundation had booked the same venue, the same ballroom. And this time, Claire was running every single element of it, from the floral concept to the donor committee seating, to the keynote speaker logistics, with the authority of someone who had been given the title that matched what she'd always been doing. Director of Corporate Events. The promotion had come, in August, recommended by Garrett Pace, and approved without negotiation, because the Q1 campaign data and the client renewal numbers had made the case so thoroughly that there was no negotiation to be had. Claire had accepted with the precise professionalism she brought to everything, and then had called Vanessa immediately after and said something that Vanessa described as extremely uncharacteristic, and which neither of them would repeat publicly. The gala evening arrived. Daniel came with Sophie, who was wearing a dress she'd selected herself, and which was, by any objective measure, the most confident fashion choice in the room. They arrived at 6:15, which was 45 minutes before guests were scheduled, and Claire was already in the ballroom, in the specific mode she entered when an event was about to happen, focused, present, moving through the room with the particular energy of someone who is completely in their element. She saw Daniel and Sophie across the ballroom and held up one finger 1 minute and finished what she was telling the catering manager. The catering manager nodded and moved. Claire crossed the room. "You're early," she said. "Sophie wanted to see the setup," Daniel said. "I wanted to see the centerpieces," Sophie said. "C said they were different this year." "They're all white garden roses," Claire said. "No filler, just the roses." "They're beautiful," Sophie said, looking at the nearest table, with the aesthetic authority of a child who had absorbed considerable event design knowledge in the past several months, simply by being nearby when it was discussed. "You're biased," Claire said. "I have good taste," Sophie corrected. "That's different." Claire looked at Daniel over Sophie's head. He was watching her with the expression she'd come to recognize as the one he had no name for, the one that had started as something he'd tried to suppress, and was now something he let be entirely visible because he'd stopped having any interest in suppressing it. "You good," she said. "Yeah," he said. "You 37 things to monitor simultaneously. So great." "You love it." "I really do," she said without irony, and went back to work. Sophie stayed with Daniel through the cocktail hour and through the first hour of the dinner program, and then fell asleep against his shoulder during the keynote address at 8:30, which was later than she usually made it, but she'd been determined to stay for the whole thing, and had nearly succeeded. Daniel sat with her sleeping against him in the back of the ballroom and watched Claire run the event. He'd watched her work hundreds of times. It never stopped being extraordinary. Not because it was showy, it wasn't. It was the opposite. The work was nearly invisible from the outside, which was the hallmark of it being done exactly right. The room moved and hummed and succeeded, and the people in it felt taken care of without knowing why, and the reason was Claire, who was everywhere and visible only when she chose to be. The auction closed at 9:40. It exceeded its target by 18%. The board chair announced it from the stage, and the room applauded, and from her position near the side of the room, Claire accepted the recognition with the composed grace of someone who had decided a long time ago that she didn't need the room to see her, and then made peace with the fact that the room was going to see her anyway. After the formal program ended, Daniel carefully transferred Sophie to a quiet chair near the back. She was deeply asleep and didn't stir, and went to find Claire. She was near the service corridor doing what she always did at the close of an event, the quiet systematic wrap-up that most people never saw, confirming vendor departures and signing off the final checklist, and making sure nothing was left undone before she allowed herself to be done. She heard him coming. She didn't look up from the clipboard. "Vendor closeout," she said. "I know. 5 minutes. Take your time." She finished the checklist. She signed the venue director's copy. She handed it back. She let out a long, slow breath through her nose, the specific exhale of someone releasing an event that is officially over and officially successful. Then she turned around. "1 year," Daniel said. She looked at him. "1 year. You were driving. The GPS froze. You handed me your phone. And you went through my contacts like a nosy person. I was finding the route. You found the route, and then you browsed. The screen slipped. It always slips toward the most interesting thing available," she said, and there was the smile, the real one, starting in her eyes. He reached into his jacket pocket. He held his phone out to her. She looked at it. At her contact open on the screen. "Claire home. Still," she said. "Still," he agreed. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she held her own phone out to him. He looked at his contact. "Daniel, text him anytime." He laughed. Actually laughed, the real version, the one that didn't have any performance in it. "Text him anytime." "It seemed right," she said. "It's exactly right." He looked at her. She looked at him. The ballroom was emptying around them, guests filtering out, staff beginning the breakdown, the ordinary machinery of an event concluding doing its work. And in the middle of all of it, the two of them stood with their phones in their hands like the world's least glamorous evidence of a love story. "Sophie is asleep in a chair in the back," Daniel said. "I know. I checked on her 20 minutes ago." "Of course you did." She shifted positions. "I put my jacket over her." He shook his head slowly. Not in exasperation, in the specific way of someone encountering repeatedly evidence of something they already knew and find confirming every time. "See," he said. Claire went very still, not in surprise, in recognition. Sophie's been using it for 2 weeks, he said. She asked if it was okay that she told me. It's okay, Claire said. Her voice was carefully even. She said she was going to use it forever. Claire looked at him. Her jaw was set in the way it got when she was holding something steady that wanted to move. Forever is a long time. Yeah, he said. It is. A beat. Daniel. Yeah. I'm standing in a ballroom at 10 o'clock at night with a vendor checklist and Sophie's jacket, and an event that just exceeded its fundraising target by 18%, and I'm about to... She stopped. About to what? She looked at him with the full, unguarded look that had taken 2 years to get to, and that he now understood was the rarest thing she gave anyone. I am so happy, she said. I need you to know that. Not in a complicated way. Not with caveats. I'm just very, very happy. He stepped forward. He put his hands on either side of her face carefully, the way you hold something that matters. Me too, he said. He kissed her in the middle of the emptying ballroom, with the staff working around them and the chandeliers dimming as the venue began its closeout, and Sophie asleep 40 feet away in a chair with her dress shoes on, because she'd refused to take them off. It lasted longer than 4 seconds this time. When they stepped back, a passing waiter pretended very professionally not to have seen anything. We should get Sophie, Claire said. We should, he agreed. Neither of them moved for another moment. Then Claire picked up the vendor checklist and her phone and Daniel's hand in that order, and they walked back into the ballroom together. Sophie was still asleep. Claire touched her shoulder. Hey, time to go. Sophie stirred. She opened one eye. She looked at Claire with the half-conscious directness of someone who has given up any pretense of subtlety, even in ordinary circumstances. Did you and Dad finish being sappy? We were not being sappy, Daniel said. I saw you from here, Sophie said. I woke up for a minute. Then why didn't you say something? Because you were being sappy, and it seemed important. She sat up and put on a shoe. Also, I wanted to finish the dream I was having. It was good. Claire helped her with the second shoe. Sophie let her. She did it with the easy familiarity of a child who has decided thoroughly and without drama that this is how things are. They walked out together. The three of them through the lobby of the Riverside Grand Ballroom and out into the October night, which was cold and clear and smelled like the particular sharpness of autumn in Ohio. Sophie walked between them, one hand in Daniel's, and then after about 30 steps, she reached her other hand up and took Claire's. She didn't announce it. She didn't make it a moment. She just took her hand and kept walking. Daniel felt it from the other side of her. He glanced over Sophie's head at Claire. Claire was looking straight ahead, but he could see the side of her face, and what he saw there was something he was going to remember for the rest of his life. They walked to the car. They drove home through October. Columbus, the city lit up and alive around them. Sophie talking about the centerpieces, and then the auction, and then something that had happened at school on Friday that she'd been saving to tell them, her voice filling the car with the specific music of a child who trusts completely that the people listening want to hear everything. They pulled into the driveway. The house was exactly the way they'd left it. Sophie's soccer cleats by the door, a library book on the hall table, the kitchen light they'd left on Claire's coffee cup from that morning still on the counter because the morning had been too busy. Home. Their home. This imperfect, reorganized facilities. Manuals in the closet, sandwich ratio debated book argument via text home. Sophie went upstairs without being told, which was new and noted. Daniel stood in the kitchen. Claire picked up her coffee cup from that morning, looked at it, set it in the sink. You forgot this morning, Daniel said. I was running late. You're always running late. I'm always running exactly on time. There's a difference. There really isn't. She turned around. She was still in her event clothes. She had vendor checklist pages folded in her jacket pocket and Sophie's jacket over her arm and the October night in her hair. And she looked at him across the kitchen of the house that had become their house, and she was smiling. I changed the drawer, she said. He looked toward the bedroom hallway. Which drawer? The one you've been keeping half empty for 4 months. He went still. Claire, I put my things in it, she said simply. All of them. Because I live here. And I'm done keeping one foot outside the door. She held his gaze. I'm all the way in, Daniel. I need you to know that. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps. He held her, and she held him back completely, without the careful, measured quality that had once marked how she allowed herself to want things. She held him like someone who has decided once and for all that she is allowed. All the way in, he said into her hair. All the way, she said. Upstairs, Sophie's light was still on. She was almost certainly reading, which meant she would be asleep in 20 minutes and deeply unconscious in 25. The library book in the hall needed to go back Friday. The coffee cup was in the sink. The closet had facilities manuals in it. The bookshelf had Claire's books. The study had Sophie's pencils and Claire's work chair and a lamp with a cord that finally reached the outlet because they'd bought an extension strip 3 weeks ago, and it had taken 2 weeks longer than it should have because neither of them remembered to buy one until Sophie added it to the grocery list herself. This was the life, not the ballroom, not the parking garage, not the borrowed phone, or the warning in the contacts, or the dramatic corridor moment before an elevator opened and changed the temperature of everything. This was it. The drawer. The extension cord. The library book. Sophie's hand reaching up on an October sidewalk without announcement or ceremony, just reaching, because this was the direction home. Daniel Hayes had spent 4 years believing that love was a thing he'd had his chance at, and that protecting the life he'd built meant holding the door closed against anything that could disrupt it. He'd been wrong about that. What he'd actually been doing was waiting without knowing it, without planning it, for the particular shape of a life that included a woman who'd saved his name under a warning and had been drafting messages she never sent, who'd made herself smaller in rooms that couldn't see her, and had never once actually been small, who'd shown up the day the babysitter called in sick, and braided his daughter's hair, and changed something in him that never went back. And Claire Bennett had spent the same years believing that love had a specific type it chose, and that she wasn't it. She'd believed it so thoroughly, and for so long, that she'd built her whole identity around being fine, without it, capable, and funny, and competent, and complete on her own, which she genuinely was. But none of those things required her to stop wanting what she wanted. It was a phone that started it. A frozen GPS and a borrowed contact list, and 4 words she'd put under his picture at 1 in the morning, after a glass of wine, and the specific courage of someone who has decided to protect themselves from their own feelings. Don't text him drunk. The warning was gone now. The drawer was full. The house had 3 people's worth of life in it, imperfect and negotiated and entirely real. And on a Friday night in October, Claire Bennett stood in her kitchen with her arms around the man she loved, in the home that was hers as much as anyone's, and she was not taking up too much space. She was exactly the right size for the life she'd built, and she was never going back to pretending otherwise.